They said she was too weak to be Luna, too broken to carry the bloodline. So on the night of her coronation, Alpha King, Darien Thorne stood before the entire court and ripped their bond apart, publicly, brutally, without mercy. Nyra Voss was erased. But what the kingdom didn't know was that rejecting her didn't make her disappear. It made her unstoppable. Stay until the end to see how the girl they threw away became the queen they couldn't escape. And if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments and hit that like button. Let's see how far this story travels. The Grand Hall of the Thornwood Palace had never looked more beautiful or more suffocating. Nyra Voss stood at the center of it all, draped in silver silk that clung to her like a second skin, her dark hair braided with moonflowers, her hands trembling despite the iron grip she kept on her composure. Around her, hundreds of wolves filled the hall, alphas from every corner of the kingdom, betas dressed in their finest, omegas whispering behind jeweled fans. The air was thick with incense and expectation, with the weight of centuries of tradition pressing down on everyone present. Tonight, she was supposed to become Luna. Tonight, she was supposed to stand beside Alpha King Darien Thorne and accept the crown that would bind her to him, to the throne, to the future of the entire kingdom. Instead, she felt like she was drowning in ice-cold water, unable to breathe, unable to think clearly. "Breathe, Nyra." The voice came from her left, soft, familiar, tinged with worry. Her younger sister, Elara, stood beside her in a gown of pale blue, her hand brushing against Nyra's elbow. "You're shaking. Everyone can see it." "I'm fine," Nyra whispered back, though her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears, like she was listening to herself from underwater. "You're not fine. You look like you're about to pass out." Elara's green eyes searched her face, concern etched in every feature. "If you need to stop this, if you need to—" "I can't." Nyra cut her off, her voice sharper than she intended. "There's no stopping this. Not now, not with everyone watching." Elara's hand tightened on her arm. "Nyra? What's wrong? And don't tell me it's nerves. I know you better than that." Nyra didn't answer. She couldn't. Because Elara was right. She wasn't fine. She felt wrong, like something inside her was fracturing piece by piece, and no amount of deep breathing or forced smiles could hold it together. The bond with Darien had always been strange, not the fiery, all-consuming connection the stories promised. It was more like a tether, tight, restrictive, pulling her toward him even when every instinct screamed to run. And lately, it had started to hurt. A dull ache at first, easy to ignore, then sharper, like claws scraping against the inside of her ribs. Like her wolf was fighting against something, struggling to break free from chains she couldn't see. She told herself it was nerves, cold feet. The weight of becoming Luna at 23, younger than any queen in recent history. The pressure of carrying a bloodline that everyone whispered about, but no one truly understood. But deep down, in the part of herself she tried not to examine too closely, she knew better. Something was wrong with her wolf. Or maybe something was wrong with her. The tremors had started 3 months ago. Small at first, a shake in her hands, a stumble in her step. Then worse. Her shifts became painful, agonizing, like her bones were breaking and reforming wrong. She couldn't hold her wolf form for more than a few minutes before the pain became unbearable. She'd hidden it from everyone, even from Darien, especially from Darien. Nyra. This time the voice was different, deeper, commanding. The voice that had once made her heart race with something that might have been love, or might have just been the bond-forcing feelings that weren't real. Darien. She turned, and there he was, Alpha King Darien Thorne, standing at the far end of the hall beneath the ancient stone archway that led to the throne room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp gray eyes that could cut through steel and see straight into your soul. His dark hair was tied back, his jaw set in that familiar expression of controlled power that never wavered, never cracked. He wore black and gold, royal colors, and he looked every inch the king he was born to be. But when his eyes met hers, there was no warmth in them, no love, no anticipation for their future together, just calculation, like he was looking at a problem he needed to solve, a variable in an equation that wasn't adding up correctly. "It's time," he said simply, his voice carrying across the hall even though he hadn't raised it. Nyra's stomach twisted into knots. She forced herself to nod, to move, to walk toward him even though her legs felt like they were made of stone, and every step took more effort than the last. Elara squeezed her hand once before letting go, and then Nyra was alone, crossing the hall under the weight of 1,000 stairs. Whispers followed her like ghosts. She looks pale. Did you see her hands shaking? They say her wolf is weak, damaged. How can she be Luna if she can't even shift properly? The Voss bloodline has always been strange, unstable. Nira kept her chin up, her shoulders back, her expression neutral. She'd learned long ago how to wear a mask, how to hide the trembling fear beneath layers of practiced composure. But inside she was screaming. When she reached Darian, he didn't smile, didn't reach for her hand, didn't offer any gesture of comfort or reassurance. He just turned and walked through the archway, expecting her to follow. And she did. Because what else could she do? The alternative was to run, to flee, to prove everyone right about her weakness. And Nira Voss had spent her entire life fighting against that label, refusing to be the broken thing they all expected her to be. The throne room was darker than the hall, lit only by torches and the pale glow of the full moon streaming through the high windows. The air here was different, heavier, older, thick with the weight of power and tradition that stretched back centuries. The elders stood in a semicircle around the twin thrones, 7 ancient wolves, their faces carved from stone, and years of seeing too much, knowing too much. At the center stood Elder Corwin, the oldest of them all, his white hair hanging past his shoulders, his eyes milky with age but still sharp as a blade. He'd been present at every coronation for the past 60 years, had witnessed the rise and fall of kings and queens, and his word carried weight that even the Alpha King couldn't ignore. Darian took his place on the larger throne, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed straight ahead at nothing in particular. Nira climbed the steps slowly, her heart hammering so loud she was sure everyone could hear it, and stood beside him where the Luna's throne waited, smaller, but no less ornate. She didn't sit, not yet. The ceremony required her to stand for the binding ritual. Elder Corwin raised his staff, a gnarled piece of ancient oak crowned with silver, and the room fell silent. Even the torches seemed to stop flickering. Tonight, he began, his voice echoing off the stone walls with surprising strength for someone so old, we gather to witness the binding of Alpha King Darian Thorn and Nira Voss, daughter of the Voss line, as Luna and King. This bond, once sealed, cannot be undone. It is sacred. It is eternal. It is the foundation upon which our kingdom stands. It is the promise of strength, of unity, of a future written in blood and loyalty. Nira felt the words like chains wrapping around her chest, pulling tighter with each syllable. Corwin turned to Darian. Do you, Alpha King, accept this woman as your Luna? Do you vow to protect her, to honor her, to stand beside her as equal and mate until the end of your days? Do you swear to cherish the bond between you as the most sacred of all oaths? The room held its breath. Darian's jaw tightened, his hands gripped the arms of his throne. And then he spoke. I do not. The silence that followed was so complete, so absolute, that for a moment Nira thought she'd misheard him, that her mind had twisted his words into something impossible, something that couldn't be real. But then the whispers started. Low at first, confused, disbelieving, then louder, spreading through the room like wildfire. Nira's breath caught in her throat. Her vision tunneled. What? Darian didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Corwin, his expression unreadable, carved from marble. I reject this bond. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her knees buckled, and she had to grab the arm of the Luna's throne to keep from collapsing right there in front of everyone. Darian, she started, her voice breaking, but he cut her off with the efficiency of a blade. Nira Voss is unfit to be Luna, he said, and his voice was loud enough now that everyone in the hall beyond could hear him, strong enough to carry his judgment to every corner of the palace. She is weak, unstable. Her wolf is fractured, her control non-existent. She cannot carry the legacy of this throne. She cannot bear the children this kingdom requires. She cannot stand as the pillar of strength that a Luna must be. No. The word came out as barely a whisper, choked and broken. No, that's not true. I have seen the signs, Darian continued, his tone cold and clinical, like he was presenting evidence at a trial rather than destroying the woman he'd claimed to love. The tremors, the failed shifts, the weakness she tries to hide but cannot. A Luna must be strong. She must be whole. She must be capable of protecting this kingdom in my absence. Nira Voss is none of these things. Around them, the elders remained silent. Some looked uncomfortable. Others nodded slowly, as if they'd expected this, as if they'd been waiting for this moment all along. Nira's vision blurred. Tears, hot and humiliating, burned at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of all these people who were watching her unravel like entertainment. The bond, the thing that had tied them together for 3 years, the invisible thread that had connected her heart to his, suddenly felt like it was being torn apart, thread by thread, and the pain was excruciating. It felt like her chest was caving in, like her ribs were breaking one by one, like something vital and irreplaceable was being ripped out of her body while she was still conscious enough to feel every second of it. She gasped, clutching her chest, and the whispers grew louder. "She's collapsing." I knew she was too weak. "The bond is killing her." "Please," she choked out, but she didn't even know what she was asking for anymore. "Please stop. Please don't do this. Please tell me this is a nightmare." Darian finally looked at her, and there was nothing in his eyes, no regret, no hesitation, no trace of the man who had once held her hand and promised her a future. Just finality. Just cold, calculated decision. "I, Alpha King Darian Thorn, sever this bond," he said, each word precise and deliberate. "By my word and my will, by the power vested in me as Alpha and King, Nyra Voss is no longer my mate. She is no longer Luna. She is no longer welcome in this court, in this palace, in this kingdom." He paused, and his next words were barely more than a whisper, but they carried like thunder. "She is nothing." The bond snapped. Nyra screamed. Man, it felt like her soul was being ripped in half, like fire and ice and lightning all at once, tearing through her veins, her bones, her very essence. The pain was beyond anything she'd ever imagined, beyond anything she thought a person could survive. It was everywhere and nowhere, inside and outside, consuming her from the center out. She collapsed to her knees, her hands pressed against the cold stone floor, her breath coming in ragged gasps that might have been sobs, or might have been her wolf howling in agony. She couldn't tell anymore, couldn't separate herself from the pain, couldn't find the edges of where she ended and the suffering began. Around her the room erupted into chaos, voices shouting, arguing, demanding explanations. Some called for order, others called for mercy. A few, and she would remember their voices later, catalog them in the dark spaces of her memory, laughed. But Nyra couldn't hear any of it clearly. All she could hear was the roar of her own heartbeat, the echo of Darian's words, the terrible hollow silence where the bond used to be, that space inside her chest that had always hummed with his presence, that had always let her feel his emotions like they were her own. It was just empty now, gone. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't hold her. She tried to speak, to defend herself, to demand an explanation, but her voice was gone, stolen by the pain. And then, through the haze of agony and humiliation, she felt hands on her arms, rough, impatient, uncaring, dragging her to her feet like she was a piece of garbage that needed to be removed before it started to smell. "Get her out of here," someone said. One of the elders, maybe, or one of Darian's guards. It didn't matter, they all sounded the same now, distant, disgusted, eager to be rid of the embarrassment she represented. They hauled her down from the dais, and she tried to fight, tried to pull away, but her body wouldn't obey her. Through the crowd that parted like she was diseased, like her weakness might be contagious. Down the steps. Through the hall where just minutes ago she'd walked with her head held high, and out into the cold night air. She stumbled, fell, got dragged to her feet again. Her dress, the beautiful silver silk that had taken weeks to prepare, tore on the stone. Her knees scraped raw against the rough ground. Her carefully braided hair came loose, moonflowers scattering in her wake like a trail of broken promises. And then they let go, and she hit the ground hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. When she looked up, she was outside the palace gates. The massive iron doors that she'd passed through 1,000 times, that she'd thought would one day be hers to command. Alone. Behind her, the doors slammed shut with a sound like thunder, and she heard the locks slide into place. Nyra didn't know how long she stayed there, kneeling in the dirt outside the gates that had just been closed against her forever. Minutes? Hours? Time had lost all meaning, had become just another thing that existed somewhere outside the bubble of her pain. She stared at the closed gates like they might open again. Like someone might come for her. Like this might all be some terrible mistake. Some test she was supposed to pass, and any moment Darian would appear and tell her it was over, that she'd proven something important, that she could come back inside now. But no one came. The moon hung high above her, cold and indifferent, casting long shadows across the ground. Her wolf stirred inside her, weak, broken, barely there, and whimpered like a wounded animal. What did we do wrong? Nira didn't have an answer. She'd spent 3 years trying to be everything Darien needed, everything the kingdom expected. She'd trained until her muscles screamed. She'd studied until her eyes burned. She'd smiled through the pain and hidden every weakness and pretended that the bond felt right even when it felt like a cage. And it hadn't been enough. She would never be enough. Slowly, painfully, she pushed herself to her feet. Her body screamed in protest, every muscle, every bone, every part of her that had just been torn apart by the severing. But she stood anyway, because staying on her knees felt like surrender, and she wasn't ready for that yet. Maybe she'd never be ready for that. She looked back at the palace one last time. The lights were still burning in every window. The music had started again. She could hear it faintly, the sound of celebration continuing without her, like she'd never existed at all. Life went on, without her. The thought should have destroyed her, should have been the final blow that brought her to her knees for good. Instead, it made something inside her go very, very quiet, very still, very cold. She turned away from the palace, away from the life she'd thought was hers, and looked toward the dark line of trees in the distance, the northern wilds, the place where wolves went to die when they had nowhere else to go. Fine. If they wanted her gone, she'd go. If they wanted her dead, well, they could come kill her themselves. Nira Voss turned her back on the Thornwood Palace and walked into the forest. The northern wilds were not kind to the broken. Nira had heard the stories since childhood. Everyone had. Rogues prowled the forests beyond the kingdom's borders. Wolves who had been exiled, abandoned, or simply gone mad from isolation. Beasts that no longer followed pack law, that had forgotten what it meant to be civilized, to be part of something larger than their own hunger. Predators that hunted anything weak enough to fall, that could smell desperation and fear from miles away. She was weak enough now, desperate enough, but she didn't care. She walked until her feet bled, until the palace was nothing but a distant glow on the horizon, until the trees grew so thick that even the moonlight couldn't reach her. The forest floor was rough, littered with roots and rocks that tore at her already damaged dress, that cut into her bare feet. Somewhere along the way, she'd lost her shoes, though she couldn't remember when. She walked until she couldn't walk anymore, until her legs finally gave out completely and she collapsed beneath an ancient oak tree, its branches spreading overhead like skeletal fingers. Her body was shaking, not from the cold, though the night air bit through her thin dress. From shock, from pain, from the emptiness where the bond used to be, still raw and bleeding like an open wound that wouldn't close. This is where I die, she thought distantly, almost clinically, alone, forgotten, exactly like they said I would. Her wolf whimpered again, and this time Nira felt tears finally start to fall, hot and bitter and useless, streaming down her face in a way that made her feel even more pathetic than she already did. She'd tried so hard, and it hadn't mattered at all. But she didn't die. Not that night, because just before the darkness took her completely, just before consciousness slipped away into the mercy of oblivion, she felt something shift inside her chest. Not the bond. That was gone, severed, destroyed. Something else. Something that had been sleeping. Something that was waking up. Her wolf stirred again, but this time it didn't whimper. It growled, deep and primal and furious. And for just a moment before the darkness claimed her, Nira felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years of being bound to Darien Thorn. Power. 3 days later. Nira woke to the smell of blood. Not her own, though she was covered in enough scratches and bruises to account for plenty of it, but something else. Something fresh and metallic and wrong. She sat up slowly, her body stiff and aching in ways she didn't remember being possible, and looked around. She was still beneath the oak tree, but the ground around her was littered with remains, bones, fur, the carcass of what looked like a rogue wolf, its throat torn out with brutal efficiency, its body half-eaten by scavengers. Nira's stomach turned violently. She scrambled backward, her heart racing, her breath coming in short gasps. What happened? The last thing she remembered was collapsing here, was feeling that strange surge of power, was hearing her wolf growl with a strength she'd never possessed before. Now there was a dead rogue at her feet, and she had no memory of how it got there. She looked down at her hands. They were clean, no blood, no claws, Her nails were broken and dirty, but human. But her wolf was awake, fully awake for the first time in months, and it felt different, stronger, sharper, hungry. A sound broke through the trees, a low, guttural snarl that made every hair on Nira's body stand on end. She looked up and saw them. 3 wolves, lean and scarred, their eyes glowing yellow in the shadows. Rogues, bigger than the dead one at her feet, meaner looking, with the kind of predatory focus that said they'd found prey and had no intention of letting it escape. They circled her slowly, deliberately, cutting off any path to run. Nira should have been terrified, should have begged, should have curled into a ball and accepted whatever came next. But instead she stood. Her legs shook, but they held, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. And when the first wolf lunged, teeth bared, claws extended, going straight for her throat, something inside her snapped. Her vision went white. Her body moved on instinct, faster than she'd ever moved before. She felt her arm come up, felt impact against flesh, heard a yelp of surprised pain. She spun, ducked under snapping jaws, and struck again. Her hand closed around fur and she pulled, felt something give way, heard bones crack. The white faded slowly, like fog burning off in sunlight. When her vision cleared, all 3 wolves were on the ground. One wasn't moving at all, its neck bent at an angle that made it clear it would never move again. The other 2 were alive but wounded, bleeding from deep gashes across their sides and throats, whimpering as they tried to crawl away from her. And Nira was standing over them, breathing hard, her hands covered in blood that definitely wasn't hers. What am I? Her heart pounded in her chest, but not from fear, from something else, something that felt almost like exhilaration. She'd killed a rogue, maybe 2, without shifting, without training, without even thinking about it. Just pure instinct and power she didn't know she possessed. The 2 surviving wolves didn't try to attack again. They stared at her with wide, terrified eyes, eyes that held recognition of something they understood on a primal level. Something that said predator, something that said danger, something that said run. And they did. They turned and fled into the forest, leaving trails of blood behind them, their whimpers echoing through the trees. Nira stared after them for a long moment, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Then she looked down at her hands again, at the blood drying on her skin, at the body of the wolf she'd killed without even meaning to. She wasn't weak, she wasn't broken, she was something else entirely. And whatever it was just waking up. 6 months later. The northern wilds had a way of stripping away everything that didn't matter. Pretense, pride, the careful masks people wore in civilization. Out here, there was only survival. And Nira had learned to survive. No, she'd learned to thrive. She stood at the entrance to a cave she'd claimed as her own, watching the sun set over the mountains. Her hair was longer now, wild and unkempt, held back with strips of leather. Her clothes were practical, leather and fur taken from animals she'd hunted herself, stitched together with patience she hadn't known she possessed. She looked nothing like the girl who had walked into these woods 6 months ago. She was nothing like that girl. Behind her, in the deeper shadows of the cave, something stirred. A low rumble, almost like a purr. Nira didn't turn around. She didn't need to. "I know," she said softly. "I smell them too." The mountain cat, a massive creature with silver fur and eyes like amber, padded up beside her and pressed its head against her hip. Nira ran her fingers through its fur absently, her eyes scanning the tree line. She no longer feared the rogues. She hunted them when they came too close, when they threatened the territory she'd claimed, when they forgot that this part of the wilds belonged to her now. She no longer ran from the beasts that prowled the shadows. She commanded them. It had started with the mountain cat, injured, half-starved, cornered by a pack of rogues. Nira had felt something pull her toward it, some instinct that said help. And when she'd stepped between the cat and the wolves, something had happened. The wolves had stopped, backed away, obeyed. Since then, it had only gotten stronger. Wolves came when she called, drawn to something in her blood, her voice, her very presence. Bears kept their distance, but watched her with what might have been respect. Even the smaller creatures, rabbits, foxes, birds, seemed to sense that she was different, that she was something the forest recognized as its own. At first, Nira had thought she was going mad, that the rejection, the bond breaking, the isolation had snapped something fundamental inside her mind. But the more she used the power, the more she understood. It wasn't madness, it was legacy. She'd found the first real clue 3 months ago in an abandoned den deep in the mountains. Someone, or something, had lived there once long ago. The den had been carved out of stone, with symbols etched into the walls that made her wolf stir with recognition even though Naira had never seen them before. And there had been a journal, old, water-stained, written in a language that was almost but not quite the common tongue everyone spoke in the kingdom. Naira had spent weeks deciphering it, piece by piece, using fragments she remembered from old texts in the palace library. What she'd found had changed everything. Her bloodline was ancient, older than the Thornwood throne, older than the kingdom itself, a line of wolves who could command the wild, who could heal faster than any alpha, who wielded power that even the strongest kings feared. Power that came from the land itself, from the primal forces that existed before civilization, before laws, before kingdoms. The journal had called them wardens, protectors of the balance between civilization and wilderness, and the council had known about them, about her. They'd known what she was, what she could become, and they'd been terrified of it, so they'd done what powerful men always did when they encountered something they couldn't control. They'd tried to destroy it. Darian hadn't rejected her because she was weak. He'd rejected her because the council had ordered him to, because they'd convinced him that her power was dangerous, unstable, that it would destroy the kingdom from within, because they feared what would happen if a warden sat on the throne. The revelation had burned through Naira like wildfire, incinerating the last remnants of self-doubt, of wondering if maybe they'd been right about her. They hadn't been right. They'd been afraid, and fear made people cruel. Nira looked down at the mountain cat, who was watching her with those intelligent eyes. "Soon," she told it quietly. "Not yet, but soon." She wasn't ready. Not quite. She was stronger now, yes. She could fight, could survive, could command the creatures of the wild with barely a thought. But going back to the kingdom meant facing Darian, facing the council, facing the entire pack structure that had thrown her away like garbage. And when she did that, she needed to be more than strong. She needed to be unstoppable. The cat rumbled again, and Nira smiled, a sharp, cold expression that had nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with purpose. "They think I'm dead," she murmured, more to herself than the cat. "Let them keep thinking that. Let them forget. Let them feel safe." She turned and walked back into the cave, where maps she'd drawn from memory were spread across the stone floor. Maps of the kingdom, of the palace, of the wild territories between here and there. And when they remember. She traced a finger along the line that marked the border between the wilds and civilization. It'll be too late. 1 year later. Nira stood at the edge of a cliff, looking down at the valley below. The kingdom spread out before her like a tapestry, villages with smoke rising from chimneys, farmland arranged in neat squares, roads connecting everything like veins carrying blood through a body. And in the distance, gleaming in the afternoon sun, the Thornwood Palace rose above it all, its towers reaching toward the sky like it owned the clouds themselves. She'd survived a year in the wilds, a year of blood and cold and loneliness. A year of learning to be something the girl she used to be wouldn't recognize. A year of discovering that weakness had never been her problem. Accepting other people's definitions of strength had been. But she was done hiding, done surviving, done being the ghost of Naira Voss. The wild was at her command now. Behind her, a pack of wolves waited in the shadows of the trees, their eyes glowing in the fading light. Not rogues, not broken strays without purpose or direction. Hers. She'd spent months gathering them. Wolves who had been cast out, abandoned, rejected, just like her. Wolves who had nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to, nothing left to lose. She'd found them in the darkest corners of the wilds, had fought beside them, had proven herself worthy of their loyalty, not through birthright or title, but through strength and blood, and the simple fact that she understood what it meant to be thrown away. Now they were an army, 27 wolves, all of them scarred, all of them dangerous, all of them waiting for her command. The mountain cat sat at her right hand, massive and patient. A pair of bears had followed her down from the higher peaks, drawn by the same power that called to everything wild. Even the birds seemed to gather when she moved, circling overhead like they were keeping watch. Naira had become exactly what the council had feared. A warden, wild and untamed and powerful enough to reshape the kingdom if she chose to. And she was going to choose to, but not the way they expected. She wasn't coming back for revenge, though that would be sweet. She wasn't coming back to beg for acceptance. That ship had sailed the moment Darian had looked her in the eyes and called her nothing. She was coming back for something far more permanent: control. The throne they'd denied her wasn't good enough anymore. The title of Luna that had been ripped away felt small now, limiting, like trying to fit an ocean into a teacup. She'd spent a year learning what she really was, what her bloodline meant, what power had been sleeping in her veins waiting for trauma to wake it up. Now she was going to teach the kingdom the same lesson. Nyra turned to the pack and smiled, a cold, sharp thing that made several of the younger wolves whimper and lower their eyes. "Ready?" she asked, though it wasn't really a question. The alpha of her pack, a scarred male named Cade, who'd been the first to bend the knee to her, stepped forward. "We follow you," he said simply. "Wherever you go, whatever you do." "Good." Nyra looked back at the valley, at the kingdom that had thrown her away and expected her to die quietly in the wilderness. "Then let's remind them what happens when you underestimate a Voss." She took a step forward, and the pack moved with her like a shadow. "Let's remind them," she said softly, her voice carrying on the wind. "What happens when you throw away a queen?" The wolves howled in response, a sound that echoed across the valley like a promise, or a warning, or both. And in the palace, far below, someone would hear that sound and wonder what it meant. Soon, they'd find out. Nyra Voss was coming home, not as the broken girl they'd rejected, as the storm they should have feared. The first village fell without a single drop of blood. Nyra had planned it that way, not out of mercy, but because fear was a better weapon than violence. Dead bodies created martyrs. Fear created submission. And she needed the kingdom to submit, not to rally around their dead. She'd chosen Riverside deliberately, small enough to be vulnerable, close enough to the capital that word would spread quickly, but far enough from the palace that Darian's guards wouldn't arrive in time to stop what was coming. The village sat in a valley where the Thornwood River bent like a silver snake, surrounded by farmland that fed half the kingdom's southern territories. Burn it, and people starved. Leave it standing but terrified, and people talked. Nyra wanted them talking. They arrived just after sunset, when the light was dying and shadows grew long enough to hide an army. The pack moved like smoke through the trees, silent despite their numbers. Nyra had spent weeks training them, not just to fight, but to move as one entity, to respond to her commands without question, to be the kind of force that looked supernatural in the fading light. She stood at the edge of the forest, watching the village through the trees. Smoke rose from chimneys. Lanterns flickered to life in windows. Children's voices carried on the evening breeze, laughing about something innocent and forgettable. Normal life, continuing like the world hadn't fundamentally changed. Like she hadn't changed it. "How do you want to do this?" Cade asked beside her, his voice low and rough. The scarred wolf had become her second without her ever officially naming him as such. He'd just started handling logistics, organizing the pack, making sure her orders were carried out efficiently. Fast or slow? Neither. Nyra's eyes tracked movement in the village square, a group of men gathering outside what looked like a tavern, probably the village council finishing their evening meal. "We're not here to destroy them. We're here to make them remember." Remember what? That there are things in the wild they forgot to be afraid of. She stepped out of the trees and the pack followed. 27 wolves moving in perfect silence, flowing through the darkness like water. The mountain cat padded at her side, its presence alone enough to make grown men reconsider their bravery. 2 bears lumbered at the rear. She'd brought them specifically for the visual impact, for the way they made people understand that this wasn't just a rogue pack. This was nature itself, bent to one woman's will. They reached the edge of the village before anyone noticed. Then a dog started barking, high-pitched, frantic, the kind of alarm that meant predator, danger, run. Within seconds, doors were opening, voices calling out in confusion, then alarm, then outright panic. Someone rang a bell, 3 sharp clangs that meant danger, threat, call the guards. But there were no guards in Riverside, just farmers and craftsmen and families who'd never faced anything more dangerous than a bad harvest or a harsh winter. The village square filled quickly, men carrying axes and pitchforks, women pulling children behind them, old folks peering from doorways. Everyone staring at the impossible sight of a woman walking out of the darkness with an army of wild things at her back. Nyra stopped in the center of the square and waited. It took them a moment to find their voices. Then everyone started talking at once, the words overlapping into meaningless noise. Who are you? What do you want? Those are rogues. Someone killed them before. Get the children inside. Where did those bears come from? Wait. An older man pushed through the crowd, his gray beard marking him as someone with authority. The village elder, probably. His eyes were sharp despite his age, taking in Naira, the wolves, the mountain cat with its amber eyes glowing in the torchlight, calculating odds, measuring threats. I know you. Nira tilted her head. Do you? Nira Voss. He said her name like he was testing it, seeing if it still fit after a year of absence. But you're dead. You died in the wilds over a year ago. The Alpha King himself confirmed it. Said you couldn't survive without the pack, without the bond. Did he? Nira smiled, and several people in the crowd took a step backward. The expression on her face wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile predators wore before they struck. Strange. I don't feel dead. The elder's hand tightened on his walking stick. Behind him, the crowd murmured nervously. What do you want? Information? Cooperation? Loyalty. She let the words hang in the air for a moment, watching faces change as people understood she wasn't asking. In that order. And if we refuse? Nira gestured slightly with one hand. Behind her, the wolves moved forward as one, just 3 steps, but it was enough. The crowd pressed backward, children crying, women screaming, men raising their makeshift weapons with shaking hands. The mountain cat opened its mouth and roared, a sound that shook windows and made the tavern's sign swing violently on its chain. Then Naira raised her hand again, and everything went silent. Still, the wolves froze mid-step. The cat sat, suddenly calm. Even the wind seemed to stop blowing, like nature itself was holding its breath. You won't refuse, Nira said quietly, but her voice carried to every corner of the square. Because I'm not asking. The elder's name was Marcus, and he was smarter than most. Instead of fighting or panicking, he invited her into the tavern, the largest building in the village, with enough space for the village council to gather. The wolves stayed outside, forming a perimeter that no one was brave enough to cross. The mountain cat lay across the tavern's entrance like a living barricade, its tail twitching occasionally to remind everyone it was still awake, still watching. Inside, 7 council members sat around a scarred wooden table, their faces ranging from terrified to furious to carefully blank. Nira took the seat at the head of the table that Marcus offered, noting the way his hands shook slightly as he poured her a cup of water from a clay pitcher. She didn't drink it immediately. Poison was unlikely but not impossible. What do you want from us? Marcus asked, sitting across from her. The other council members were silent, watching, waiting. Tell me what's happening in the capital. Nira finally took a sip of the water. It was clean, cold, tasted like the mountain stream she'd been drinking from for a year. Safe. Politics, power shifts, who's risen, who's fallen, who's making decisions, and who's just following orders. A younger council member, barely out of his 20s, with the kind of soft face that had probably never known real hardship, laughed. It was a nervous, brittle sound that cracked in the middle. You want us to spy for you? Against the Alpha King? Against the throne we've sworn loyalty to since birth? I want you to talk, Nira corrected, her voice mild. Whether that's spying depends on your perspective. And if we don't? The young man leaned forward, trying to look brave, trying to prove something to himself or the others. You'll kill us? Destroy the village? Prove everyone right about you being unstable and dangerous? About you being exactly what the Alpha King said you were? Naira looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she stood, slow and deliberate, and walked around the table. The young man's bravado crumbled with every step she took, until by the time she reached him, he was pressed back in his chair like he was trying to melt through the wood. She placed both hands on the table in front of him and leaned down until they were eye level. Let me tell you what I've learned in the past year, she said softly, each word precise and clear. Killing is easy. Any rogue can kill, any beast can destroy. That's not power, that's just violence. Children throwing tantrums with claws instead of fists. The young man swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. Real power, Naira continued, is making people choose to help you, making them understand that their survival depends on your mercy, not your anger. Making them realize that fighting you isn't bravery, it's suicide. She straightened, releasing him from her gaze. So no, I won't kill you. I won't burn your village or slaughter your families or do any of the things your fear is telling you I might do. She walked back to her seat and the relief in the room was palpable. I'll leave this village exactly as I found it, alive, intact, functional. And in return, you'll tell me what I want to know. You'll spread the word that Nira Voss isn't dead, that she's stronger than anyone imagined, that she's coming back. She sat down and looked at Marcus. And when the time comes, you'll remember who showed you mercy tonight, who could have destroyed you and chose not to. She leaned back in her chair. Now, the capital. Talk. Marcus exchanged glances with the other council members. She saw the silent conversation happening, the weighing of options, the calculation of consequences, the moment when survival instinct won out over loyalty to a king 300 miles away. Finally, Marcus sighed, the sound of a man making a choice he knew he couldn't unmake. The kingdom's falling apart, he said simply. Over the next 2 hours, Marcus painted a picture of a kingdom in slow collapse. After Nira's rejection, Darian had tried to maintain control through sheer force of will. He'd thrown himself into ruling with an intensity that bordered on obsession, making decisions faster, punishing dissent more harshly, demanding absolute loyalty from every alpha in territory. But without Aluna, without the stability that the mate bond represented, cracks had started appearing in the foundation of his rule. The other alphas had begun questioning his decisions. Not openly, that would be suicide, but in whispers, in private meetings, in the small acts of defiance that added up over time. Border disputes that would have been resolved with a word from the throne now dragged on for months, sometimes erupting into violence. Trade agreements fell apart. Old alliances frayed. The council had grown more powerful, filling the vacuum left by the absent Luna. They made decisions without consulting the king, slowly eroding his authority one decree at a time. Darian fought back, but he was one man against 7 ancient wolves who'd been playing political games since before he was born. "There's talk of rebellion," Marcus said, his voice low, like saying it too loud would make it manifest into reality. "Not open yet. The alphas are too smart for that. But the northern territories are refusing to pay tribute. The eastern alphas are forming alliances without the king's approval, building power bases that exist outside the throne's influence. And the council?" He trailed off like the words were stuck in his throat. "The council what?" Nira prompted, though she could already guess. "They're looking for a replacement, a new Luna. Someone stable, from a proven bloodline, with no history of complications." Marcus met her eyes, and she saw sympathy there, or maybe pity. She'd stopped being able to tell the difference. Someone they can control. Nira's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level. "Who?" "Lady Seraphina Blackwood, daughter of the Western Alpha. She's young, beautiful, fertile according to the pack healers, and completely under the council's control. Her father sold her to them, essentially, in exchange for increased territory and a seat at the council table." Something cold and sharp settled in Nira's chest. Not jealousy, she'd long since burned through any feelings she'd had for Darian. This was something else, something that tasted like vindication mixed with fury. They were replacing her with a puppet, proving everything she'd suspected about why they'd gotten rid of her in the first place. "When?" she asked. "The bonding ceremony is planned for the next full moon, 3 weeks from now." Marcus hesitated. "There's more. The council is pushing for her to conceive immediately. They want an heir before the end of the year, someone with legitimate claim to the throne who will be raised under their influence. Does Darian know?" Nira leaned forward. "That they're controlling him? That this whole thing is just the council trying to secure their power through his children?" Marcus shrugged, the gesture helpless. "Hard to say. He's not the same king he was a year ago, harder, colder, more ruthless. Some say the rejection broke something in him too, that severing the bond damaged him as much as it did you. Others say he's finally showing his true nature without you there to soften the edges." "Good," Nira said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "Let him break. Let them all break. Let the whole corrupt system collapse under its own weight." One of the other council members, a middle-aged woman with intelligent eyes, spoke up for the first time. "You're planning something. This isn't just about gathering information." "No," Nira agreed. "It's not." "What are you going to do?" Nira stood, pushing back from the table. The council members flinched, but she ignored them. Her mind was already racing ahead, calculating, planning, seeing the pieces on a board only she could fully visualize. "I'm going to remind the kingdom what they threw away," she said. I'm going to show every alpha, every territory, every wolf who's suffering under Darien's failing rule that there's another option, a better option. You, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Me. Nyra walked to the door, then paused and looked back. One more thing. Spread the word. Tell everyone you know, everyone who'll listen, everyone who's tired of watching the kingdom fall apart. Nyra Voss is alive. She's strong. She survived everything they said would kill her. She smiled, sharp and cold. And she's coming for what's hers. Marcus stood slowly. And what's yours exactly? Nyra's smile widened. Everything. They left Riverside the way they'd come, silent, swift, leaving no destruction behind except the invisible kind that lived in people's minds. Just fear. Just stories. Just the beginning of a legend that would grow with every retelling, spreading through the kingdom like wildfire. As they climbed back into the mountains, Cade fell into step beside her. That went well, he said. No blood? No bodies. Message delivered clean. It's a start. Nyra kept her eyes on the path ahead, navigating by moonlight and the instinct she'd developed over a year of living wild. But we need more than one village. We need the whole kingdom talking. We need Darien to hear our name in every report, every conversation, every whispered rumor. What's the plan? Nyra had been thinking about that for months, building it piece by piece in her mind while she trained, while she hunted, while she learned to command the power in her blood and the creatures that responded to it. We hit 3 more villages in the next week, she said. Different territories, different approaches, same core message. By the time we're done, every alpha in the kingdom will know I'm alive. And then? Then we go north. Cade's steps faltered for just a moment. The northern territories? That's where the rebellion's brewing, where the alphas are already questioning Darien's authority, already building armies and making plans. Exactly. Nyra glanced at him, her eyes catching the moonlight. If they want to rebel, they need a leader. Someone with a legitimate claim to power, someone the council fears, someone who can unite them under a single banner instead of letting them fracture into a dozen small wars. Understanding dawned in Cade's eyes. You're not just announcing your return. You're building an army. I already have an army. Nyra gestured to the wolves spread out around them, to the mountain cat padding silently ahead, to the bears lumbering behind. What I need are allies, political power, resources, territory, a legitimate claim strong enough to challenge the throne without it looking like a simple power grab. You think the Northern Alphas will follow you? I think they'll follow anyone who isn't Darien. Anyone who can give them what they want. Freedom from the Council's control, autonomy in their territories, power they've been systematically denied. She paused, choosing her words carefully. And I can give them all of that. All they have to do is recognize me as Luna, as the rightful queen who was illegally deposed. Cade was quiet for a long moment, the only sound their footsteps and the soft padding of the pack around them. Then, this is going to get bloody. You know that, right? The council won't let you just walk back in and take over. Darien won't step aside peacefully. I know. Nyra's hand drifted to her side where she'd started carrying a knife. Simple, practical, sharp enough to skin game or defend herself or cut a throat if necessary. She'd learned to use it well over the past year, had practiced until the weight of it felt natural in her hand. I'm counting on it. You want them to fight? I want them to show their true nature, to prove to the entire kingdom that they'll use violence to maintain power, that they'll kill rather than admit they were wrong. Nyra's voice was cold, calculated. You can't reform a system from within when the system itself is designed to crush reformers. You have to break it, completely, and then build something better from the pieces. And if you become just like them in the process? Nyra stopped walking. The pack stopped with her, sensing the tension in the air. She turned to face Cade directly, and in the moonlight her eyes looked ancient. I've spent a year learning to survive in a place designed to kill me. I've hunted and been hunted. I've killed to eat and killed to live, and learned that sometimes violence is the only language certain people understand. She held his gaze. The difference between me and them is simple. They use power to control. I'll use it to liberate. You sure about that? No, Nyra admitted. But I'm willing to find out. The second village fell 3 days later. Millbrook was larger than Riverside, positioned along a major trade route with actual defenses, a garrison of 12 trained guards, walls that wouldn't stop an army but might slow down raiders, and a population that had seen enough conflict to not panic at the first sign of danger. Nira sent the wolves in first, not to kill, to terrify. They surrounded the village at dawn when the mist was still heavy and visibility was poor. Then they howled, all 27 of them in perfect unison, the sound echoing off the hills like the world itself was crying out in pain or fury or both. The guards rushed out, weapons drawn, formations tight, professional, ready to defend against a rogue attack. Then Nira walked out of the mist, and the howling stopped. Dead silence, just her footsteps and the soft breathing of the pack behind her. The captain of the guard, a scarred man in his 40s, with the bearing of someone who'd seen real combat, who'd survived things that killed softer men, stared at her for a long moment. His sword was raised, ready to strike. Then he lowered it. "I'll be damned," he breathed. "The stories are true." "What stories?" Nira asked, genuinely curious. She'd wondered how fast word would spread, how much the tale would change in the telling. That you survived, that you're commanding rogues like they're tamed dogs, that you're coming back to claim the throne. He looked past her at the wolves, at the mountain cat visible in the mist, at shapes that might have been bears. They said you'd gone mad, that the rejection broke your mind, that you were attacking villages and killing innocent people. "Do I look mad to you, Captain?" He studied her, really looked at her for the first time, taking in the confident stance, the clear eyes, the practical clothing that spoke of someone who'd learned to survive rather than someone who'd lost themselves. What he saw made him take a step backward. "No," he said slowly. "You look dangerous, controlled, like you know exactly what you're doing." "Good." Nira moved closer, watching the other guards tense but hold position. "Disciplined. Then you understand that I'm not here to fight. I'm not here to burn your village or kill your people or prove anything except that I'm alive, and I'm not the broken thing they said I was. What do you want?" "To talk. Your village council. Now." The captain hesitated, and Nira could see the calculations running behind his eyes, weighing his options, measuring his odds, trying to figure out if he could win this fight, and more importantly, if winning would matter. "You can't," Nira said, reading his thoughts in his body language, in the way his hand tightened on his sword hilt. "Your 12 guards against my pack? You'd be dead in minutes. Some of you might take a few wolves down with you, but you'd all die. And for what? To protect a council that would replace you tomorrow?" "My duty." "Your duty is to protect this village. And the best way to protect it right now is to let me talk to your council without forcing me to go through you to do it." She held his gaze. "I'm not your enemy, Captain, but I will be if you make me be." The captain looked at his men, then back at Nira. Whatever he saw in her eyes, certainty, power, the absolute conviction that she would do exactly what she said, made his decision for him. "Come on then," he said, sheathing his sword with obvious reluctance. "But the wolves stay outside. All of them." "Obviously." Nira gestured, and the pack settled into waiting positions around the village perimeter. "I'm not a savage, Captain, just someone who learned that survival requires adaptation." "There's a difference?" he asked as they walked toward the village center, his guards forming a loose escort around them. Nira smiled. "Not as much as civilized people like to think." Millbrook's council was less cooperative than Riverside's had been. Maybe because they had professional guards to protect them instead of farmers with pitchforks. Maybe because the village was wealthier, more connected to the capital, with more to lose by defying the throne. Maybe because they genuinely believed in Darien's rule, or at least believed in the stability it represented. Or maybe they were just stubborn. "You want us to commit treason," the head councilman said flatly. He was younger than Marcus had been, maybe 40, with the kind of polished appearance that spoke of wealth and education. His clothes were expensive, his hands soft, a man who'd never known real hardship. "That's what this is. You're asking us to betray the Alpha King, to spread sedition, to undermine the legitimate government. I'm asking you to acknowledge reality," Nira corrected. She was sitting at their council table again, but this time the atmosphere was openly hostile. 2 guards stood behind her, a precaution the captain had insisted on, like 2 men could stop her if she decided to leave or fight or do anything except sit politely. "Darien is a failing king presiding over a fracturing kingdom. The council is using him as a puppet. The territories are on the verge of open rebellion, and I'm offering you a chance to be on the winning side when everything falls apart." "The winning side?" The councilman laughed, the sound dismissive and superior. You're a rejected mate with a pack of rogues and delusions of grandeur. The king has armies. He has the loyalty of most of the kingdom. He has the law and tradition and the council backing him. What do you have? Something he doesn't. Naira leaned forward, her elbows on the table. I have nothing to lose. The room went quiet at that, because it was true, and everyone knew it. A person with nothing to lose was the most dangerous kind of enemy. You think you can scare us into betraying our king? Another council member asked, a woman this time, older, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a mouth set in a hard line. We're not some backwater village that's never seen power before. We know what happens to traitors. We've seen the executions. We've watched people we knew die because they chose the wrong side. And I've seen what happens to people who stay loyal to sinking ships, Naira countered. They drown, all of them. And nobody remembers their names except as cautionary tales. Big talk from someone who ran away the moment things got hard. The words came from the doorway. A new voice, young and male and dripping with contempt and arrogance. Naira turned and saw him. A boy, maybe 19 or 20, dressed in the armor of a palace guard. The insignia on his shoulder marked him as part of Darian's personal detail. He must have been visiting the village, maybe on leave to see family, maybe on some errand for the capital, and he clearly had no idea who he was talking to, or didn't care. I didn't run, Naira said quietly, her voice level and calm. I was thrown out, exiled, rejected in front of the entire court and physically removed from the palace. There's a difference, right? Because you were too weak to be Luna. The boy stepped into the room, his hand on his sword hilt, his posture aggressive, young and stupid and convinced of his own invincibility. Everyone knows the story. The Alpha King rejected you because you couldn't even shift properly without screaming, because you were unstable, damaged, not worth the bond. Damaged goods that couldn't produce proper heirs. Something inside Naira went very still, very cold. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. What's your name? She asked, her voice soft. Thomas. Thomas Crane. And I serve the true Alpha King, not some pretender who thinks commanding a few mangy wolves makes her... He didn't get to finish. Naira moved faster than anyone in the room could follow. One moment she was sitting at the table. The next she was across the room, her hand wrapped around Thomas's throat, slamming him against the wall hard enough to crack the plaster and send dust raining down from the ceiling. The guards behind her drew their weapons with a metallic rasp. The council members shouted, their chairs scraping backward. The captain started forward, barking orders, but they all stopped when Naira's eyes changed, not to wolf gold, which would have been expected, to something else, something older. Something that made Thomas's face go pale and his hand scrabble uselessly at her grip, unable to break it despite being larger and presumably stronger. Let me tell you a story, Thomas, Naira said, her voice soft but carrying to every corner of the room with unnatural clarity. Once upon a time, there was a girl who believed everything she was told, that she was weak, that she needed protection, that her worth was defined by whether some man wanted her, whether she could bear the right children at the right time. She tightened her grip slightly, watching his eyes widen as his air cut off. Then that girl got thrown away like garbage, and she learned something important in the wild, something that civilized wolves seem to forget. Naira leaned closer, until they were almost nose to nose, until Thomas could see nothing but her eyes and whatever lived behind them. Weakness is a choice, and she chose to stop being weak. She released him. Thomas collapsed to the floor, gasping and choking, his hand going to his throat where bruises were already forming in the shape of her fingers. He tried to draw his sword, but his hands were shaking too badly. Naira turned back to the council, ignoring him completely. I'm going to make this very simple, she said, her voice still calm, still controlled. You have two choices. Help me. Provide the information I need, spread the word that I'm alive and coming back. And when I take the throne, and I will take it, you'll be rewarded. Your village will prosper. Your cooperation will be remembered. She paused, letting that sink in. Or fight me. Stay loyal to a king who's failing, to a system that's crumbling. And when I take the throne anyway, you'll be remembered as the village that chose the wrong side, that chose comfort over survival, that chose tradition over truth. You can't just... The head councilman started, his face red with anger or fear or both. I can, Naira interrupted. I have. And I will continue to do so until someone makes me stop. The question is, Do you really want to be the ones who try? Do you want to test whether your guards can kill me before my pack tears through this village? Do you want to gamble your people's lives on loyalty to a king 300 miles away who wouldn't cross the street to save you? The silence stretched out, tense and brittle and fragile as ice. Finally, the older woman spoke. Her voice was tired, resigned. What do you want to know? No, they gave her everything. Troop movements, supply routes, which villages supported Darien and which were wavering, which alphas were content and which were angry, which council members held real power and which were just figureheads, the names of nobles who were questioning the throne, who might be convinced to switch their loyalty if the right opportunity presented itself. The information was more detailed than what Riverside had provided, either because Millbrook was better connected or because they were more motivated to cooperate fully. By the time Naira left Millbrook, she had a map forming in her mind, not of geography, but of power, where it was concentrated, where it was weak, where it could be fractured, where alliances could be built or broken. Thomas the guard left with them, unconscious and tied across one of the wolves' backs, his armor stripped away. What are you going to do with him? Kate asked as they climbed back into the mountains, leaving the village behind. Send a message. Nira didn't look at the unconscious guard. Leave him at the edge of the palace grounds tomorrow night with a note pinned to his chest. Saying what? That Naira Voss sends her regards, that she's not weak, not broken, not afraid, and that the next guard who insults her won't make it home at all. Cade grinned, showing teeth. You're getting mean. I'm getting effective, Naira corrected. Mean is what happens when people ignore effective, when they mistake mercy for weakness and restraint for fear. They hit the third village 2 days after that, Stonegate, a mining community in the eastern foothills. The council there was more pragmatic. They saw which way the wind was blowing and bent rather than breaking. They gave her information, spread her message, and asked only that she remember their cooperation when the time came. Then the fourth village, Crossroads, named for its position at the intersection of 3 major trade routes. The council was divided. Half wanted to support her, half wanted to report her to Darien immediately. Naira let them vote. When the vote came up even, she broke the tie herself by pointing out that reporting her meant she'd have to kill everyone in the room to prevent it, which would be unfortunate for everyone involved. They chose cooperation. By the end of the week, half the kingdom was talking about the ghost in the mountains, the rejected Luna who'd come back wrong, the woman who commanded rogues like they were palace guards, who moved through villages like smoke, who could kill but chose to intimidate, who was building something in the shadows while the throne crumbled in the light. Stories spread and grew in the telling. Some said she could control any wild creature with a thought. Others claimed she could shift into forms no normal wolf could achieve. A few whispered that she'd made deals with ancient powers, that she was something more than wolf now. Naira encouraged the rumors. Let them believe whatever made them afraid, whatever made them remember her name, whatever made Darien lose sleep. And in the capital, Alpha King Darien Thorn was finally starting to pay attention. The summons came through Marcus at Riverside. A royal messenger arrived in the village 5 days after Naira's first visit, demanding to know if the rumors were true. If Naira Voss had really been there, if she'd really threatened the village and then left them unharmed. Marcus, to his credit, told the truth. All of it. The messenger returned to the capital, and 3 days later, Darien issued a proclamation that was posted in every village square, read aloud in every marketplace, delivered to every alpha in the kingdom. Naira Voss, formerly of the Voss bloodline, was to be captured on sight and brought to the capital for trial. Any village found harboring her would be considered an open rebellion against the throne and dealt with accordingly. Any alpha offering her assistance would lose their territory and title. There was a bounty, enough gold to buy a village, maybe 2, maybe 3, depending on the location. And there was a personal message, delivered through the messenger to Marcus, with instructions to make sure it reached Naira's ears through whatever channels necessary. Come home. We can fix this. It doesn't have to end in war. Naira was deep in the mountains when she heard, sitting by a fire with her pack spread out around her. Cade delivered the news, reading from a copy of the proclamation that someone from Millbrook had smuggled out and sent through a network of messengers Naira hadn't known existed but was grateful for. When he got to Darien's personal message, Naira laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was harsh and bitter, and edged with something that might have been pain if you listened closely enough. Fix this? She repeated, her voice rising. Fix this? He thinks we can just fix this like it's a broken chair or a torn dress. He's trying to bait you, Cade said carefully, watching her face. Get you to come to him on his terms, in his territory, where he controls everything. It's a trap. I know what he's doing. Naira took the proclamation and read it herself, her eyes scanning the formal language, the legal threats, the promise of clemency if she surrendered peacefully and submitted to the throne's justice. He still thinks I'm the girl he rejected, the one who'd come crawling back if he just offered her a way out, a chance to be forgiven for the crime of surviving. So what are you going to do? Naira folded the proclamation carefully, creasing each edge with deliberate precision. Then she held it over the fire until it caught, the paper curling and blackening, Darian's words turning to ash that the wind scattered into the darkness. I'm going to show him exactly how wrong he is, she said quietly, watching the flames consume the last of his message. We're going north, tomorrow at first light. The Northern Territories, Cade confirmed, to meet with the rebel alphas, to give them what they want. Nira stood, the firelight casting her shadow long across the ground, making her look twice her actual size. A leader, a cause, a legitimate alternative to a failing king, a reason to finally stop bowing to someone who doesn't deserve their loyalty and never did. She looked up at the stars, at the vast expanse of sky that had been her only ceiling for a year, that had witnessed her transformation from broken girl to something else entirely. Darian wants to fix this, she said. Fine, I'll fix it. I'll fix everything that's broken about this kingdom, every corrupt system, every unjust law, every tradition that values power over people. By tearing it down? Cade asked, though he already knew the answer. Naira smiled into the darkness. By burning it to the ground and building something better from the ashes. By showing everyone that the old ways are dead, that the old powers can be challenged, that change is possible if you're willing to fight for it. She turned to face the pack, all of them watching her with glowing eyes, waiting for her command. And if they want war to prevent that change? She asked the night, the mountains, the wild things that had become her family. Then we'll give them war. We'll give them the kind of war they'll tell stories about for generations. The kind where the rejected comes back and burns down everything that rejected her. The pack howled their approval, the sound echoing through the mountains like a promise or a threat or a declaration of intent. And in the capital, 300 miles away, Alpha King Darian Thorn heard that howl carried on the wind and knew, finally, that he'd made a mistake. Not just rejecting her, but thinking she'd die from it. The Northern Territories began where civilization ended. Nira stood at the border 3 days after burning Darian's message, looking across a landscape that made the wilds she'd survived seem tame by comparison. Jagged mountains rose like broken teeth against the sky, their peaks lost in clouds that never seemed to clear. The forests here were older, darker, filled with things that had never bowed to any king. The wind carried the scent of snow and pine and something else, something wild and ancient that made even her pack uneasy. Last chance to turn back, Cade said beside her, though his tone suggested he knew she wouldn't. Why would I do that? Nira adjusted the pack on her shoulders. Supplies for a week, maybe 2 if they rationed carefully. We came here for a reason. We came here to meet with alphas who've been planning rebellion for months, who don't know you, don't trust you, and might decide killing you is easier than listening to you. Cade's eyes scanned the tree line, watching for threats. The Northern Territories aren't like the villages. These wolves don't follow rules. They don't care about tradition or politics or legitimate claims to power. Good. Nira started walking, and the pack followed. Then they'll understand what I've become better than anyone in the capital ever could. The first settlement they reached wasn't really a settlement at all, just a collection of rough shelters built into the side of a cliff, camouflaged so well that Naira almost walked past it. Only the smell of smoke and the sound of voices gave it away. A wolf stepped out from behind a boulder, blocking their path. Male, early 30s, with scars that suggested he'd survived things that would have killed softer men. His eyes went to Naira, then to the pack behind her, then back to her face. You're either very brave or very stupid, he said. Which is it? Neither. I'm Naira Voss, and I'm here to see Alpha Tauren. The wolf's expression didn't change. Never heard of you. You will have, Cade said. If you've heard anything from the Southern Territories in the past 2 weeks. Recognition flickered across the wolf's scarred face. The ghost. The rejected Luna who's supposed to be dead. Not a ghost, Naira corrected. Just someone who learned that being dead is easier than being powerful when you're alive and people are afraid of you. The wolf studied her for a long moment. Then he jerked his head toward the cliff. He'll want to see you. But you leave the animals outside, all of them. No. Then you don't get in. Nira took a step closer. The wolf's hand went to the knife at his belt, but he didn't draw it. Smart. My pack goes where I go, she said quietly. They're not pets or tools or weapons I can just set aside. They're mine, and I'm theirs, and that's not negotiable. Alpha Tauren won't. Then Alpha Tauren can come out here and tell me himself. Nira crossed her arms. I didn't walk 300 miles to be turned away by a guard who's afraid of wolves. The standoff lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then a voice called out from deeper in the settlement. Let her through, Dane. If she's brave enough to walk in here with an army, I want to know why. The wolf, Dane, stepped aside, though he looked unhappy about it. Your funeral. Probably, Nira agreed and walked past him. But, Alpha Tauren was nothing like she expected. Most alphas she'd met cultivated an image, powerful, dominant, in control. They dressed well, stood tall, made sure everyone in the room knew exactly who held power. Tauren sat on the ground in front of a fire, cleaning blood off a hunting knife with a rag that had seen better days. He was maybe 50, with gray streaking through his dark hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same stone as the mountains around them. When he looked up at Nira, his eyes were the pale blue of glacier ice. Nira Voss, he said, her name sounding strange in his rough accent. The king's rejected mate. Heard you were dead. Common misconception. Nira sat down across from him without being invited. Behind her, the pack settled into a loose semicircle, close enough to protect her, but far enough to give the appearance of respect. I'm very much alive. I can see that. Tauren went back to cleaning his knife. Question is, what are you doing in my territory? Southern politics don't reach this far north. We don't care who's king or who's Luna or who the council wants warming the throne. That's why I'm here. Tauren's hand stilled. Explain. You want independence? Freedom from the throne's control, from the council's interference, from tribute and taxes and laws made by people who've never set foot in these mountains. Nira kept her voice level, stating facts rather than making arguments. You've been building toward rebellion for years, gathering support, stockpiling weapons, training fighters, waiting for the right moment to break away. You know a lot for someone who's been dead. I know that Darien is weak, that the kingdom is fracturing, that the council is scrambling to maintain control by replacing me with someone they can manipulate. Nira leaned forward slightly. And I know that if you rebel now, fractured and divided with 6 different alphas all wanting to lead, you'll fail. The throne will crush you piece by piece, and the northern territories will be brought to heel like disobedient children. Tauren set down his knife. And you have a better plan? Unite first, rebel second, under one banner, one leader, one vision for what comes after. Nira held his gaze. Under me. The silence that followed was broken by laughter, harsh and disbelieving. You? Tauren shook his head. A rejected mate with a pack of rogues wants to lead the northern territories against the throne? What makes you think we'd follow you? Because I'm the only one with a legitimate claim to challenge Darien. Because I survived everything designed to kill me. Because I understand what it means to be cast out and rebuilt and become something stronger. Nira's voice hardened. And because I can give you what none of your alphas can, a reason for the rest of the kingdom to join us instead of fighting us. The rest of the kingdom loves their king. The rest of the kingdom is terrified. They're watching their leaders fail, their security crumble, their future disappear. They don't love Darien. They're just too afraid to admit it. Nira stood and the pack rose with her. But if someone gives them an alternative, if someone shows them that change is possible, that the old powers can be challenged and beaten. She let the implication hang in the air. Tauren stood as well, slower, his age showing in the way he moved. You're asking me to bet everything on you. My territory, my people, their lives. I'm offering you a chance to win instead of just surviving long enough to die fighting. Nira met his eyes. You can keep planning your fractured rebellion and watch it fail, or you can take a risk on someone who's already done the impossible just by staying alive. Tauren was quiet for a long time, his ice blue eyes searching her face for something, weakness, doubt, deception. Whatever he saw, it made his decision. The other alphas will want to meet you, judge you for themselves. He picked up his knife and sheathed it. Some will support you. Some will try to kill you for the bounty on your head. Some will just refuse to believe you're real. When?
3 days. There's the gathering planned at the old fortress ruins, 2 days north of here. We meet every new moon to coordinate, share information, plan. He smiled, and it wasn't friendly. You'll get your chance to convince them, but if they don't like what they hear, I'll handle it. I'm sure you will. Torn gestured to Dane. Show them to the guest shelter, and make sure everyone knows the ghost is real, and she's here to start a war. The next 3 days were spent preparing. Nyra knew she'd only get one chance to convince the Northern Alphas to follow her. One speech, one demonstration of power, one opportunity to prove she was more than just a rejected mate with delusions of grandeur. She needed to be perfect. Cade helped her craft the message, refining it over and over until every word served a purpose. You can't lead with the rejection, he said on the second night, sitting across from her while the pack slept around them. It makes you look like you're doing this for revenge. I am doing this partly for revenge. Then don't tell them that. Cade's expression was serious. Revenge is personal, selfish. What you need to sell them is liberation, justice. A better future for everyone, not just you getting even with the man who threw you away. Nyra knew he was right, but the truth was more complicated. She wanted justice, yes. She wanted to fix the broken system. But she also wanted to watch Darian's face when he realized what he'd created by rejecting her. When he understood that trying to destroy her had only made her stronger. Was that revenge or justice? Maybe both. Maybe it didn't matter as long as the end result was the same. On the morning of the third day, they set out for the fortress ruins. The journey took them deeper into the mountains than Nyra had ever been, following paths that barely existed, climbing slopes that would have been impossible before her transformation. The air grew thinner, colder. Snow appeared in patches, then covered everything in a blanket of white that made navigation difficult. They reached the ruins just before sunset. The fortress had been built centuries ago, back when the Northern Territories were their own kingdom before being conquered and absorbed. Most of it had fallen to time and weather, but enough remained to show how massive it had been. Stone walls 20 feet high, towers that still stood despite missing their roofs, a great hall that could have held hundreds. And it was full of wolves. Not just full, overflowing. Nyra counted at least 200, maybe more, all of them watching as her pack emerged from the tree line. The gathered alphas sat in a semicircle at the center of the ruins, 6 of them, each with their own contingent of fighters surrounding them like living shields. This was the Northern Rebellion. Not a plan or a rumor, but a real force with real power. And Nyra was about to ask them to follow her. Torrin stood as she approached, gesturing to an empty space in the semicircle. Alphas of the North, this is Nyra Voss. Some of you have heard the stories. Now you can judge the truth for yourselves. Nyra stepped into the circle, very aware of how exposed she was, how many eyes were watching her, how many of these wolves would happily collect the bounty on her head if they thought they could get away with it. She let the silence stretch, let them look, let them judge. Then she spoke. A year ago, I was rejected by Alpha King Darian Thorn in front of the entire court. Stripped of my title, my bond, my place in society, cast out into the wilds to die like the weak thing they claimed I was. Her voice carried across the ruins, clear and strong. They expected me to break, to fade away quietly like a shameful secret no one wanted to remember. Instead, I survived. I learned. I became something they never expected and couldn't control. She gestured to the pack behind her. I learned that power doesn't come from titles or thrones or councils. It comes from will, from refusing to accept what others say you are, from surviving what was meant to kill you. One of the alphas, a woman with white blonde hair and scars across her face, laughed. Pretty speech. But what does any of that have to do with us? You want us to feel sorry for you? Help you get revenge on your ex-mate? No. Nyra turned to face her directly. I want you to stop wasting time planning a rebellion that will fail. The murmurs that followed that statement were angry, offended. Careful, Torrin said quietly. Nyra ignored him. You're fractured. 6 alphas, 6 armies, 6 different visions for what comes after you win. You think the throne doesn't know that? You think they're not counting on you to tear each other apart the moment you try to act? She shook her head. Darian is weak, yes. The council is scrambling, but they're not stupid. They'll let you rebel, watch you fracture, then crush the pieces one by one. And you're different how? Another alpha asked. Male, middle-aged, with the kind of calculating eyes that suggested he was the political thinker of the group.
Because I don't just want independence for the North. I want to remake the entire kingdom. New laws, new power structure, real representation for every territory instead of just whoever the council favors. Naira's voice strengthened. You want freedom? I'll give you freedom. But first we take the throne, together, united, under a single banner that the rest of the kingdom can rally behind. Your banner, the calculating Alpha said. Yes. Why should we follow you? You're untested, unknown. You have no territory, no resources, no proof you can do anything except command some rogues. Nira had expected this question, had prepared for it, but her answer still felt like stepping off a cliff. Because I'm a warden. The silence that followed was absolute. Then someone laughed again, nervous this time, disbelieving. Wardens are extinct, have been for centuries. Are they? Naira raised her hand, and the mountain cat emerged from the shadows behind her, padding forward to sit at her side. She placed her hand on its massive head, and the cat rumbled. Wardens commanded the wild, healed faster than any alpha, wielded power that came from the land itself, not from pack bonds or hierarchy. She looked around the circle, meeting each alpha's eyes in turn. The council knew what I was, what I could become. That's why they ordered Darien to reject me. Why they spread lies about me being weak and unstable. They were afraid that if a warden took the throne, they'd lose control, lose their power, lose everything they'd built on the backs of territories like yours. Prove it, the white blonde alpha demanded. Prove you're not just some rejected mate with a talent for training animals. Nira smiled, gladly. What happened next would be talked about for years. Naira closed her eyes and reached for the power she'd been learning to control, the thing that had awakened in her blood when the bond broke. She felt it respond immediately, eager, hungry, wild. The ground beneath them trembled. Not much, just enough to make people stumble, to send loose stones rattling. Then the wolves came. Not her pack, wild wolves from the mountains, hundreds of them, emerging from the forest in a wave of fur and teeth and glowing eyes. They surrounded the fortress ruins, circling but not attacking, their howls filling the air like a physical force. Bears followed. Massive creatures that had no business being this high in the mountains this time of year, drawn by something they couldn't resist. Birds darkened the sky, ravens and hawks and eagles, more than anyone had ever seen in one place. And through it all, Naira stood at the center, her eyes open now, glowing with something that wasn't quite wolf gold. The wild recognizes its own, she said, her voice somehow audible over the howling and the thunder of paws and wings. The land remembers what it means to have a warden walk among you, and it will answer when I call. She raised both hands, and everything went silent. Still. The wolves froze mid-howl. The bears stopped moving. Even the birds seemed to hover in place. Then Naira lowered her hands, and they all dispersed as quickly as they'd come, melting back into the forest like they'd never been there. The gathered alphas stared at her with expressions ranging from awe to terror. The white blonde alpha spoke first. I'll be damned, you really are... The arrow hit Naira in the shoulder before anyone could react. She staggered backward, pain exploding through her body, her hand going to the shaft protruding from her flesh. Blood spread across her shirt, hot and wet. Chaos erupted. Cade was moving, the pack was snarling. The northern wolves were shouting and drawing weapons, trying to figure out where the attack had come from. But Nira's eyes had already found the archer. He stood on top of one of the ruined walls, backlit by the setting sun, reloading for another shot. The armor he wore was unmistakable. Royal Guard, Darien's personal detail. And he wasn't alone. More guards emerged from behind the ruins, at least 20 of them, surrounding the gathered alphas with weapons drawn. They'd been hiding, waiting, watching. This had been a trap. Naira Voss! One of the guards shouted. The captain, probably. By order of Alpha King Darien Thorn, you are under arrest for sedition, rebellion, and crimes against the crown. Surrender now and you'll be granted a trial. Resist and die where you stand. Naira pulled the arrow from her shoulder with a sharp gasp of pain, feeling her healing already trying to knit the wound. Blood dripped onto the stone beneath her feet. She looked at the captain, then at the gathered alphas, then back at the captain, and she laughed. You really think, she said, her voice carrying despite the pain, that I didn't know you were here? The captain's expression flickered with confusion. Nira gestured to the ruins around them. You've been following me since Millbrook, tracking my movements, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. You thought cornering me in front of the Northern Alphas would break their support before it even started. She took a step forward, and the guards tensed. But you made a mistake. You revealed yourself too early, before you knew what I could do, before you understood what I've become. Her eyes locked on the captain. And now you're surrounded by 300 wolves who have to make a choice. Stand with you and the failing king who sent you, or stand with me and the future I'm offering. The captain raised his sword. Northern Alphas! There's a bounty of 50,000 gold for anyone who helps capture... He didn't finish, because Torin's knife took him in the throat. The Alpha stepped over the falling body and looked at his fellow leaders. Well, guess we're committed now. What? The battle that followed was short and brutal. The royal guards were well-trained, professional, disciplined, but they were outnumbered 15-1, surrounded by wolves who'd been looking for an excuse to start the rebellion, who saw this as the perfect opportunity to draw first blood. Nyra watched it happen in a haze of pain and adrenaline, her shoulders still bleeding despite her enhanced healing. Cade was beside her, supporting her weight, keeping her upright. You knew they were here, he said, and it wasn't a question. I suspected. Darian's too smart to let me gather support without trying to stop it. Nira pressed her hand to her shoulder, feeling the wound slowly closing. I just didn't expect them to attack during my demonstration. Thought they'd wait until later. You could have warned us. Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was paranoid, seeing threats that weren't there? She watched one of the guards go down under 3 wolves. This way. The Northern Alphas got to see exactly who their real enemy is. Got to make the choice to stand with me instead of being told to. The white-blonde Alpha appeared beside them, her sword dripping blood. That was either brilliant or suicidal. Haven't decided which. Can it be both? Nira asked. The Alpha grinned. I'm Lissa, and I think I like you. She looked at Torin, who was coordinating the cleanup. We're all in now. Can't go back after killing royal guards. The king will see this as an act of war. Good, Nira said. Let him come. Let him send his armies north. Let him try to crush us like he crushed everyone else who stood against him. And when he does, Nira's smile was sharp despite the pain. We'll be ready. They burned the bodies of the royal guards in a mass pyre that night, sending smoke into the sky like a signal that could be seen for miles. A declaration of war without words. The 6 Northern Alphas gathered again after the battle, but this time the circle included Nyra, not as a guest or supplicant, but as an equal. We have maybe 2 weeks before Darian hears about this, Torin said, his voice grave. When he does, he'll mobilize. Send everything he has to crush us before word spreads to the other territories. Let him, Lissa said. She was cleaning her sword, the same one she'd used to kill 3 guards. We've been waiting for this fight for years. We're not ready, the calculating Alpha, his name was Marcus, same as the elder in Riverside, argued. We need more weapons, more supplies, more training. Fighting the king's army with what we have now would be suicide. Then we don't fight here. All eyes turned to Nyra. She'd been silent since the battle, conserving her strength while her shoulder healed, thinking through the next steps. We take the fight to them. Hit the kingdom where it's weak. Fracture Darian's support base before he can consolidate it against us. Explain, Torin said. Nira stood, moving to a crude map someone had drawn in the dirt. Darian's power comes from 3 sources, the Council, the tribute from the territories, and the loyalty of the Southern Alphas. We need to break all 3. She pointed to different locations on the map. The Council is in the capital, untouchable for now, but the tribute comes through specific routes stored in specific locations before being transported to the palace. We cut those supply lines. We starve the throne of resources. And the Southern Alphas? Marcus asked. We give them a reason to switch sides. Show them that Darian is weak, that the throne can't protect them, that their loyalty is to a failing king. Nyra's finger traced a line across the map. We attack the tribute stores, redistribute the wealth to the villages that have been suffering under heavy taxes. We spread the word that we're not conquerors, we're liberators. That's a dangerous game, another Alpha said. Elena, quiet until now, with eyes that suggested she was always listening. Make yourself look too much like saviors and people will expect you to save them from everything. They'll have expectations you can't meet. Better than being seen as invaders, Nyra countered. Darian will paint us as rogues and rebels destroying the kingdom. We need to control that narrative before he does.
Lissa laughed. You think like a politician.
I was trained to be Luna. Politics was part of the education. Nira's expression darkened. I just never thought I'd use it like this. The Alphas talked through the night, planning, arguing, slowly forming a strategy that combined Nira's political understanding with their knowledge of the terrain and Darian's weaknesses. By dawn, they had a plan. In 3 days, they would strike simultaneously at 4 different tribute stores across the kingdom. Fast raids, in and out before reinforcements could arrive. They'd take the gold and supplies, distribute them to nearby villages, and leave messages making it clear this was Nira Voss's work, that she was fighting for the people Darian had abandoned. It was risky, ambitious, the kind of plan that would either announce them as a real threat or get them all killed. But it was a start. As the meeting broke up and wolves started preparing for the raids, Torin pulled Nira aside. You understand what you've started here? He said quietly. This isn't just rebellion anymore. This is war, real war, with real casualties, and it won't end until either you or Darian is dead. I know. Do you? His ice blue eyes searched her face. Because once this starts, there's no going back. No surrender. No mercy from either side. You're condemning thousands of wolves to die for your claim to a throne. Nira felt the weight of that, the enormity of what she'd set in motion. All these wolves, all these lives, all hanging on her decision to fight instead of fade away. Yes, she said finally. I know exactly what I've started. And I know what it will cost, and you're willing to pay that price? Nira thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, broken, rejected, cast out to die. She thought about everything she'd survived, everything she'd become, everything she'd learned about power and survival and the cost of change. The question isn't whether I'm willing, she said. It's whether Darian is. Because I've already lost everything I could lose. I've already died once and came back stronger. What does he have left to take from me? Torin studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then I guess we find out who's stronger. A king who's never had to fight for his throne, or a ghost who has nothing left to lose. The first raid happened 3 nights later. Nira led it personally, along with Cade, Lissa, and 50 of the best fighters from the northern packs. They hit a tribute store near the eastern border, a fortified warehouse guarded by 20 soldiers, storing enough gold and supplies to fund the palace for months. They were in and out in less than an hour. By the time reinforcements arrived, the warehouse was empty. The guards were unconscious and tied up, and Nira's forces had vanished into the forest. They left behind a single message painted on the warehouse wall in red. The ghost sends her regards. The north rises. The other 3 raids went equally well, coordinated, efficient, executed before Darian's forces could respond. By the end of the week, 4 tribute stores were empty. The gold was being distributed to villages that had been suffering under heavy taxation, and Nira's name was on everyone's lips. The kingdom was talking about her. The Alphas were talking about her. And in the palace, Alpha King Darian Thorn finally understood that the ghost he'd created wasn't going to stay buried. Quote, the response came faster than anyone expected. A royal decree, delivered to every Alpha, posted in every village square. Nira Voss was declared an enemy of the crown. Any territory harboring her would be considered an open rebellion. The bounty was increased to 100,000 gold, and Darian himself was mobilizing an army, not to capture her, but to destroy her and everyone who followed her. The northern territories had 2 choices, surrender Nira and beg for clemency, or prepare for war. They chose war. But they weren't ready for what came next, because 3 days after the decree, a messenger arrived at the northern fortress bearing a letter with the royal seal. It was addressed to Nira. She opened it in front of all 6 Alphas, unfolding the parchment with hands that didn't quite shake. The message was short, direct, written in Darian's own hand. I'm coming for you, and when I find you, I'm going to show you exactly what happens to ghosts who don't stay dead. You wanted war? You have it, and this time there won't be anything left of you to reject. But first, I'm going to show you what war really costs. Your sister sends her regards. Nira's blood went cold. What is it? Torin asked, seeing her face go pale. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Because attached to the letter was something else. A piece of fabric torn from a dress she recognized. Pale blue silk. The dress Alara had been wearing the night of the rejection ceremony. The night everything fell apart. Darian had her sister, and he was daring Nira to come save her. The piece of pale blue silk fell from Nira's fingers and drifted to the ground like a dying butterfly. For a moment, she couldn't move, couldn't think. The world had narrowed to that single scrap of fabric and what it meant. Alara, her sister, the only person who'd stood beside her the night everything collapsed, was in Darian's hands. Naira? Cade's voice came from somewhere far away. What does it say? She couldn't answer. Her throat had closed, every word trapped behind the rising tide of panic and rage, threatening to drown her from the inside out. Torin picked up the letter, his eyes scanning the words. His expression darkened with every line. It's a trap. Obviously. He's baiting you to come to the capital, to walk right into his hands. I know, Nira managed, though her voice sounded hollow, even to her own ears. Then we don't take the bait, Lysa said firmly. We stick to the plan. Continue the raids, build support, force him to fight us on our terms instead of his. He has my sister. The words came out flat, empty, but they silenced the room. Marcus stepped forward, his calculating eyes studying her face. Your sister isn't part of this war. She's a civilian, uninvolved in the rebellion. Taking her hostage violates every rule of engagement, every tradition. If word gets out that Darian is kidnapping innocent family members, you think he cares about traditions? Naira's laugh was bitter. He rejected his mate in front of the entire court and threw her out to die. He's already broken every rule that matters. Then what are you going to do? Torin asked quietly. Nira looked down at the piece of silk on the ground, at the evidence of Darian's cruelty, at the trap he'd laid so carefully. She'd spent a year learning to survive, learning to be strategic, patient, to think 3 moves ahead instead of reacting from emotion. But Alara was her sister, the girl who'd held her hand that last night, who'd whispered encouragement when Nira's courage faltered, who'd been the only one in that entire palace who'd looked at her with something other than pity or contempt. And Darian was using her as bait. I'm going to get her back, Naira said. That's suicide, Elena said, speaking for the first time since the letter arrived. The capital is the most fortified position in the kingdom. Even if you make it through the gates, you'd never make it to wherever he's holding her. And even if you did, you'd never make it out alive. Then I die trying. And we lose our leader before the war even really starts, Marcus said sharply. Before we've had a chance to build the support we need, before we've fractured Darian's power base enough to make a real challenge. You walk into this trap and everything we've built dies with you. Nira knew he was right, knew every word was logical, strategic, correct. But she also knew that if she abandoned Alara, if she left her sister to whatever Darian had planned, she'd be proving him right, proving that she'd become exactly what he'd accused her of being, cold, calculating, willing to sacrifice anyone for power. There has to be another way, Cade said, his voice cutting through her thoughts. A way to get Alara without walking straight into his hands. Like what? Lysa demanded. We can't fight an army to break into the capital. We don't have the numbers or the resources. No, Nira said slowly, an idea beginning to form. But we don't need to fight an army. We just need to make Darian think we will. Everyone turned to look at her. Explain, Torin said. Naira picked up the piece of silk, turning it over in her hands. Darian sent this to provoke me, to make me come to him in a rage without thinking, without planning. He expects me to do exactly what everyone in this room thinks I'll do, charge in and try to rescue Alara alone, or with a small force that he can easily crush. And you're saying we do something different? Marcus asked. I'm saying we give him what he expects, but not the way he expects it. Naira's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. We make him think I'm coming alone. Make him focus all his attention, all his defenses, on capturing me when I arrive. And while he's distracted, someone else gets your sister out, Cade finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. Exactly. Elena shook her head. That's still incredibly risky. You'd have to get close enough to the capital to be convincing, to draw his focus. If something goes wrong, if the rescue fails, then I'll deal with it. Nira looked around the circle of alphas. I'm not asking any of you to risk your people for this. This is my family, my responsibility. But I need your help to make it work. Silence fell across the room as the alphas exchanged glances, having one of those wordless conversations that came from years of leading together. Finally, Torin spoke. What do you need? Relief flooded through Naira, though she kept her expression neutral. A small team, 5, maybe 6 of your best fighters who can move quietly, blend in. People who can get into the capital without being noticed. I have 3, Lysa said immediately.
Scouts who've been working the southern territories for months. They know the capital's layout, the guard rotations, the weak points in the defenses. I can provide 2 more, Marcus added. Ex-palace guards who defected north when they got tired of the council's corruption. They'll know where hostages are typically held. Good. Nyra turned to Cade. You'll lead the rescue team. Get in, find Alara, get out. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. And what will you be doing while we're sneaking around the capital? Cade asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Being the very obvious, very threatening distraction that Darien can't ignore. That's the suicide part of the plan, Elena observed dryly. Not if I'm careful. Nyra's hand went to her shoulder, which had fully healed from the arrow wound but still ached when the weather changed. I've survived worse than a confrontation with my ex-mate. Have you? Torrin's ice-blue eyes were sharp. Because last time you faced him, he broke your bond and threw you out to die. What makes you think this time will be different? Last time I still believed he had power over me, that the bond meant something, that his opinion mattered. Nyra's voice hardened. I don't believe that anymore. And I've learned a few things since then that will make him very uncomfortable. She saw understanding flicker across their faces. The demonstration she'd given, the wild responding to her call, the power that came from her warden bloodline. When do we move? Lissa asked. Tomorrow night. We need to move fast before Darien gets impatient and decides to hurt Alara to draw me out faster. Nyra looked at each alpha in turn. Thank you. All of you. I know this isn't the strategic move, isn't what we should be prioritizing, but family matters, Torrin interrupted. It's one of the few things worth fighting for when everything else is politics and power games. We understand that. Marcus nodded slowly. And if you succeed, if you rescue your sister right out from under Darien's nose, it'll do more for our cause than another month of raids. It'll show the kingdom that the ghost is real, that she can strike anywhere, that not even the capital is safe from her reach. Assuming I survive, Nyra said. You will, Cade said with a certainty that surprised her, because you're too stubborn to die before you've made him regret everything. Despite the situation, despite the fear and anger churning in her gut, Nyra smiled. Damn right I am. The planning took the rest of the day and most of the night. Cade's rescue team would enter the capital disguised as merchants, blending in with the increased traffic that always came before the New Moon Festival. They'd split up once inside, gathering information, locating Alara, identifying escape routes. Meanwhile, Nyra would approach from the north with a visible force, not enough to actually threaten the capital's defenses, but enough to look threatening. Enough to make Darien focus all his attention on her while Cade's team worked. It was risky. Full of variables they couldn't control. The kind of plan that looked brilliant on paper but could fall apart the moment reality interfered. But it was the best they had. As dawn broke, Cade pulled Nyra aside while the others were preparing their equipment. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. We could find another way. Wait for a better opportunity. There won't be a better opportunity. Darien made his move. Now we make ours. Nyra checked her knife, the familiar weight of it comforting in her hand. Besides, I need to face him eventually. Might as well be now, on my terms instead of his. These aren't your terms. You're walking into a trap. I'm turning his trap into mine. There's a difference. She looked at him, this scarred wolf who'd become her second, her friend, maybe the closest thing she had to family besides Alara. Promise me you'll get her out. Whatever happens to me, promise me you'll keep her safe. Nyra, promise me, Cade. He held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. I promise. But you better survive this, because if I have to explain to your sister why I let you do something this stupid, she'll probably kill me herself. Nyra laughed despite everything. She probably would. They left an hour later, splitting into 2 groups that would take different routes to the capital. Cade's team traveled light and fast, dressed as ordinary travelers. Nyra's group was the opposite, visible, loud, accompanied by her pack, and enough wolves from the northern territories to look like a legitimate threat. The journey south took 2 days of hard travel. Every mile closer to the capital, Nyra felt the weight of what she was about to do pressing down on her. She was going back to the place that had destroyed her, back to face the man who'd torn her soul apart and expected her to fade away quietly. But she wasn't the same person he'd rejected, and she was going to make sure he understood that. They made camp 5 miles north of the capital on the second night, in a forest clearing that gave them a view of the city's lights in the distance. The palace rose above everything else, its towers illuminated like beacons.
Somewhere in there, Darien was waiting. Somewhere in there, Alara was being held. Nira stood at the edge of the clearing, staring at those distant lights, remembering the last time she'd seen them, the night she'd walked away from the palace gates with her dress torn and her spirit broken. Second thoughts? Torin appeared beside her. He'd insisted on coming despite his age, claiming someone needed to make sure she didn't do anything too reckless. Third and fourth thoughts, Nira admitted, but I'm still going. Good, because we just got word from Cade. His team made it through the gates without incident. They're inside gathering information. Relief washed through her, step 1 complete. How long until they locate Alara? Best guess? Another 6 to 8 hours. They have to be careful, can't just start asking questions about the king's hostage without drawing attention, which meant Nira needed to provide a distraction that would last at least that long. Keep Darien's focus on her instead of looking for infiltrators in his city. No pressure. Get some rest, Torin suggested. We move at dawn. You'll need your strength. But Nira couldn't sleep. She spent the night pacing, planning, going over every possible scenario in her mind. What she'd say to Darien. How she'd handle the guards. What she'd do if Cade's team was discovered. When dawn finally broke, she was exhausted but wired, running on adrenaline and determination. They approached the capital in full daylight, making no attempt at stealth. Nira rode at the front on the Mountain Cat, a deliberate choice designed to be as visible and threatening as possible. Behind her, 50 northern wolves spread out in formation, their numbers looking larger than they actually were. The gates of the capital closed as they approached, guards scrambling into defensive positions along the walls. Nira stopped just outside arrow range and dismounted, walking forward alone until she was close enough to be heard clearly. I'm here to speak with Alpha King Darien Thorn, she called out, her voice carrying across the open ground. Tell him the ghost he tried to bury wants to have a conversation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the gates opened just wide enough for a single person to exit. Not Darien. Elder Corwin, the ancient wolf who'd overseen her rejection ceremony. He walked toward her slowly, leaning heavily on his staff, his milky eyes somehow still finding her face despite their apparent blindness. Nira Voss, he said when he was close enough that guards couldn't hear. You should not have come back. I didn't have much choice. Darien has my sister. A regrettable necessity. Corwin's expression didn't change. The king needs to ensure your cooperation. By kidnapping an innocent woman? That's not cooperation, Elder. That's terrorism. Call it what you will. The fact remains, you are an enemy of the crown, leading a rebellion against the legitimate government. Your sister's life is forfeit unless you surrender yourself for trial. Nira smiled, cold and sharp. Then I guess we're at an impasse, because I'm not surrendering, and he's not getting away with this. You cannot win this fight, child. Even with your northern allies, even with whatever power you've discovered in your bloodline, you cannot stand against the full might of the kingdom. Can't I? Nira took a step closer, watching Corwin instinctively step back. I survived everything designed to kill me. I built an army from nothing. I stole your tribute, turned your territories against you, and exposed every weakness in Darien's rule. What exactly makes you think I can't win? Because we were prepared for you. Corwin's voice dropped. Did you really think we wouldn't anticipate this? That we'd simply wait for you to gather strength and strike? Cold dread settled in Nira's stomach. What did you do? The king is willing to make an exchange. You, for your sister. Come through these gates, submit to the king's justice, and she walks free. Refuse, and he trailed off meaningfully. And you'll kill her? We'll do what's necessary to end this rebellion before it spreads further. Nira's hands clenched into fists. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to fight, to call his bluff. But what if it wasn't a bluff? What if they really would kill Alara? I need time to think about it, she said. You have until sunset. After that, we'll assume your answer is no and act accordingly. Corwin turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I tried to tell them you were stronger than they believed, that casting you out would only make you dangerous. They didn't listen. Do they ever? No. He looked back at her, and for just a moment, something like regret flickered across his ancient face. Which is why this kingdom is dying, and why perhaps it deserves what's coming. He walked back through the gates, which closed behind him with a sound like thunder. Nira stood there for a long moment, staring at the massive wooden doors, at the walls that had once been meant to protect her, that now stood between her and her sister. She turned and walked back to where Torin was waiting with the others. Well? He asked. They want me to surrender in exchange for Alara. I have until sunset to decide. You're not actually considering it? Lissa demanded. Of course she's considering it, Marcus said quietly. It's her sister. It's also a trap designed to end the rebellion before it really starts, Elena pointed out. They'll take you, kill you, probably kill your sister anyway, and then crush the Northern Territories without a legitimate leader to unite them. I know. Nira looked at the sun, calculating time. Maybe 4 hours until sunset. How long until Cade reports in? He's supposed to check in at midday if everything's going according to plan. 2 more hours. 2 hours to wait and hope that Cade's team could locate Alara and get her out before the deadline forced Nyra's hand. They waited in tense silence, every minute feeling like an hour. Finally, a bird landed on Torin's shoulder, one of the messenger ravens the Northern Territories used for quick communication. He unrolled the tiny scroll attached to its leg and read quickly. His expression darkened. What? Nyra demanded. What does it say? They found her. She's being held in the Eastern Tower, 3rd floor, under heavy guard. Torin looked up. But Cade says the security is too tight. They can't get to her without being spotted, and once they're spotted, they'll never make it out. Nira's mind raced. The Eastern Tower. She knew that building, had walked past it 100 times when she'd lived in the palace. It was designed as a final defensive position, with only one entrance and multiple checkpoints. Getting in quietly was impossible, but getting in loudly. Send a message back, she said suddenly. Tell Cade to wait for my signal. When security shifts to deal with me, he'll have his opening. What are you planning? Torin asked suspiciously. To give them exactly what they want. Me, walking through those gates. Nira's smile was fierce, just not the way they're expecting. Before anyone could argue, she was moving, calling her pack together, feeling the power in her blood responding to her need. She was done playing it safe, done being strategic and patient. Darian wanted her to come to him? Fine. She'd come. But she'd come as the thing he'd created when he threw her away, wild, dangerous, and completely beyond his control. Nira walked back to the gates alone, her pack spreading out behind her at a distance. The guards on the walls tensed, arrows knocked, ready to fire if she came too close. She stopped just outside their range and called out, her voice carrying across the distance. Tell Darian that Nyra Voss accepts his terms. I'll surrender myself in exchange for my sister's freedom. Confused murmurs ran along the wall. This clearly wasn't what they'd expected. But, Nyra continued, her voice hardening, I'll only surrender to him, face to face. No intermediaries, no guards, no council members. Just him and me, the way it should have been from the beginning. More murmuring. Someone disappeared from the wall, presumably to relay the message. Minutes ticked by. Then the gates opened, and Darian stepped through. He looked different than she remembered. Harder. The year had carved lines into his face that hadn't been there before, and his gray eyes held a coldness that made him look almost like a stranger. But when those eyes found her, something flickered in them. Recognition, maybe, or surprise that she was really here, really real, really alive. He walked toward her slowly, deliberately, like a predator approaching prey. Nyra stood her ground, though every instinct screamed at her to run, to fight, to do anything except stand there and let him get closer. Nyra, he said, when he was maybe 10 feet away, close enough to see her face clearly, to see how she'd changed. You really did survive. Disappointed? Impressed. His eyes traveled over her. The practical clothing, the knife at her belt, the confidence in her stance that hadn't been there before. You look different, stronger. Turns out almost dying changes a person. She kept her voice level, emotionless. Do we have a deal? Me for Alara? That depends. Are you really prepared to surrender? To submit to trial? To accept whatever punishment the court decides? He took another step closer. Or is this another scheme, another trick from the ghost who's been terrorizing my kingdom? Your kingdom. Nira laughed, the sound bitter. You really believe that, don't you? That this kingdom is yours, that these people are yours, that you have some divine right to rule them into the ground. I am the rightful Alpha King. You're a puppet. The words came out sharp, cutting. The council controls you, manipulates you, uses you to maintain their own power while you pretend you're in charge. They ordered you to reject me because they were afraid of what I might become, and you did it without question because you've never had the spine to stand up to them. Darian's expression darkened. Careful, Naira. You're in no position to— To what? To tell the truth? To point out that you threw away your mate because 7 old men told you to? She took a step forward, matching his movement. You never wanted to reject me, Darian. I could feel it in the bond before you severed it. You were afraid, uncertain, conflicted. But you did it anyway because you're too weak to fight for what you actually want. I rejected you because you were unstable, dangerous, a threat to the kingdom's stability. I was a threat to the council's control. There's a difference. Naira's eyes locked on his. And now I'm back, stronger than ever, leading an actual rebellion instead of just being a potential problem. So tell me, how did destroying me work out for you? Silence fell between them, tense and charged with a year's worth of anger and pain and words neither had been able to say. Then Darian smiled, cold and calculating. You're right, he said quietly. I was weak. I let them control me, manipulate me, use me, but I've learned from that mistake. He raised his hand, and guards started pouring through the gates behind him, dozens of them, spreading out to surround Naira's position. Now I make my own decisions, and I've decided that you're too dangerous to be kept alive. Naira's heart raced, but she didn't move, didn't run. This was the moment, when Darian committed his forces to capturing or killing her, when security throughout the palace shifted to support the guards surrounding her, when Cade would have his opening. You can try to kill me, she said, watching the guards close in. But you should know, I'm not the scared girl you rejected anymore. She reached for the power in her blood, feeling it respond immediately, eagerly. The ground trembled. All around them, from the forests and fields surrounding the capital, came the sound of howling. Not her pack, the wild wolves she'd called, drawn by the same power that let her command the creatures of the wilderness. They emerged from the trees like a flood, hundreds of them, surrounding the capital in a living wall of teeth and fury. The guards faltered, looking around in panic. Darian's eyes widened. What did you do? I told you I learned a few things. Naira smiled. Did you really think I'd come here alone? That I'd walk into your trap without a plan? She raised both hands, and the wolves charged, not toward the guards, but past them, past the gates, into the capital itself, creating chaos, panic, forcing the guards to split their attention between her and the threat to the civilians inside. In the confusion, Naira ran, not away from the capital, toward it. She ducked under a guard's grabbing hands, used another's momentum to throw him into his companion, and sprinted for the gates. The mountain cat appeared beside her, massive and terrifying, keeping the guards back with snaps of its huge jaws. Behind her, she heard Darian shouting orders, but his voice was drowned out by screaming and howling and the chaos she'd unleashed. She made it through the gates, into the city proper, and immediately turned toward the eastern tower. She knew this city, had walked these streets 1,000 times, and now she used that knowledge to navigate the panic, weaving through crowds of terrified civilians, guards rushing toward the walls, merchants abandoning their stalls. The eastern tower was 3 blocks away. 2 blocks. 1. She burst through the door and ran straight into 4 guards who'd been left behind to secure the building. They drew their weapons, but Naira was faster. A year of fighting for survival had taught her things the palace guards had never needed to learn. She was under the first guard's sword before he could swing, her knife finding the gap in his armor. The second guard grabbed her from behind, but she dropped her weight, twisted, and sent him stumbling into the third. The fourth guard was smarter. He backed away, drawing a bow, aiming for her chest. Then Cade appeared behind him and snapped his neck with brutal efficiency. Took you long enough, Cade said, breathing hard. Had to make an entrance. Alara? 3rd floor, like we thought. Elena's team is getting her out now, but we need to move fast. The whole palace is going on lockdown. They ran for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. Behind them, Naira could hear more guards entering the building, shouting, searching. They reached the 3rd floor just as Elena emerged from a hallway with Alara supported between her and another northern wolf. Alara looked terrible, bruised, exhausted, her pale blue dress torn and dirty. But when she saw Naira, her eyes widened. You came, she whispered. They said you'd come, but I didn't believe. Of course I came. Naira grabbed her sister in a fierce hug, feeling Alara shake with sobs against her shoulder. Did you really think I'd leave you here? We need to move, Cade said urgently. Now. They started back down the stairs, but guards were already coming up. trapped between forces above and below. Nira looked around desperately, then spotted a window. There. We're 3 stories up, Elena protested. I know, trust me. She ran to the window and threw it open, leaning out to look down. The courtyard below was empty. Everyone had rushed to deal with the wild wolves attacking the outer city. Nira closed her eyes and reached for her power one more time, calling out to anything that could help. She felt them respond before she saw them. Birds, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, flying toward the tower in a dark cloud. They swarmed into the courtyard below, creating a living cushion of wings and feathers. You cannot be serious, Cade said. Jump or fight. Your choice. Nira didn't wait for an answer. She grabbed Alara, pulled her to the window, and jumped. They fell through open air, Alara screaming, Nira's stomach dropping sickeningly. Then they hit the mass of birds, which scattered and reformed, breaking their fall enough that when they hit the ground, it hurt, but didn't kill. Above them, Cade cursed loudly and jumped with Elena. They landed hard, rolling, coming up bruised but intact. Run! Nira shouted, hauling Alara to her feet. They ran through the palace grounds, past gardens Nira had once walked through peacefully, past fountains and courtyards and buildings full of memories she'd rather forget. Guards spotted them, gave chase, but the wild wolves appeared from nowhere, cutting off pursuit, buying them precious seconds. The palace gates were ahead, thrown open in the chaos. Nira could see Torin and Lissa beyond them, waiting with the northern forces, ready to cover their escape. Almost there, almost free. Then Darian appeared in front of them, blocking the path, his eyes blazing with fury. You're not taking her, he snarled. Watch me. Nira pushed Alara toward Cade. Get her out, now! Nira, go! Cade hesitated for just a moment, then grabbed Alara and ran, Elena covering them. Nira turned to face Darian alone, her knife in her hand, her power thrumming through her veins. You want me so badly, she said. Then come get me. Darian shifted, a blur of motion and power, his wolf form massive and terrifying. He was pure alpha, bred for strength and dominance, trained from birth to fight. Nira was a warden. They clashed in the middle of the courtyard, teeth and claws in desperate fury. Darian was stronger, but Nira was faster, fueled by rage and the power singing in her blood. She ducked under his jaws, raked her claws across his side, danced away before he could retaliate. But she couldn't keep this up forever. He was too strong, too skilled, too powerful. She needed to end this fast. Nira reached deep, deeper than she'd ever gone before, calling on the power she'd been afraid to fully embrace. The warden legacy that the council had feared, that had been sleeping in her blood for generations. The ground erupted beneath Darian's paws, roots and vines bursting from the earth to wrap around his legs, his body, holding him in place. He snarled and struggled, but the more he fought, the tighter they held. Nira shifted back to human form, breathing hard, bleeding from a dozen small wounds. She walked up to where Darian was trapped and looked him in the eyes. I could kill you right now, she said quietly. End this. Take the throne. Give the northern territories what they want. Darian growled, unable to speak in wolf form. But I won't, because you're more useful to me alive. A failing king who proves everything I've been saying about the council's corruption, about the need for change. She leaned closer. Keep your throne, Darian. Keep your kingdom. But know that every day you sit on it, I'm out here building something better. And when I come back, and I will come back, it won't be to beg or negotiate. She straightened. It'll be to take what's mine. Then she ran, releasing her hold on the roots as she went, not waiting to see if he'd chase. She sprinted through the gates, past Torin and the northern wolves, not stopping until she was deep in the forest beyond the city. Only then did she let herself stop, let herself breathe, let herself process what had just happened. Cade appeared beside her, Alara still supported in his arms. We did it. We actually did it. Nira looked back in the capital, at the towers rising above the walls, at the palace where she'd once thought she'd live as Luna. Yeah, she said. We did. Alara reached out, grabbing Nira's hand. Thank you. I was so afraid. You're safe now. Nira squeezed her hand. And Darian just learned an important lesson. What's that? Torin asked, appearing with Lissa and the others. Nira smiled, fierce and triumphant despite her exhaustion. That the ghost he created is real. That she can strike anywhere, even the heart of his power. And that she's not afraid of him anymore. She looked around at the faces of the northern wolves, at the allies who'd risked everything to help her rescue her sister. We need to get back north, regroup, plan the next move. Because after this, Darien will come for us with everything he has. Let him come, Lysa said, grinning. We'll be ready. As they started the journey back to the Northern Territories, Nyra felt something shift inside her. She'd walked into the capital as a leader trying to prove herself. She was walking out as something more, a real threat to the throne, a symbol that change was possible, a ghost that had become solid and dangerous and impossible to ignore. The war was just beginning. But for the first time since this all started, Nyra believed she could actually win it. The war was just beginning. But for the first time since this all started, Nyra believed she could actually win it. That belief lasted exactly 5 days. They made it back to the Northern Territories without incident, Alara wrapped in furs and still shaking from her ordeal. The fortress ruins welcomed them like a sanctuary, and for one night they allowed themselves to celebrate. Small victories mattered when you were fighting an empire. Then the scouts came back with news that turned celebration into ash. Darien wasn't coming for them with an army. He was coming with 3. Nyra stood in the great hall, barely more than half-collapsed stone walls and a roof that let in rain, staring at the maps spread across a makeshift table. Red marks indicated Darien's forces, advancing from 3 different directions, south, east, and west. The only route left open was north, deeper into the mountains where the terrain became impossible and supplies ran out. A trap designed to crush them against the wilderness or force them into a battle they couldn't win. 5,000 soldiers, maybe more, Marcus said, his voice grim. Professional fighters, well-equipped, led by Darien himself. We have maybe 800, half of them farmers and hunters, who've never fought in a real battle. Then we don't fight, Elena said. We scatter, disappear into the mountains, wage guerrilla war, hit them when they're vulnerable and fade away before they can respond. That's survival, not victory, Lisa countered. We scatter now. We lose everything we've built. The legitimacy, the unity, the belief that we can actually change things. We become exactly what Darien says we are. Rogues and bandits, not a real revolution. Better rogues than corpses, Elena shot back. The argument continued, voices rising, tempers fraying. Nyra listened to all of it, feeling the weight of every word. These were her allies, her friends, people who'd risked everything to follow her. And now she had to decide whether to ask them to die for a cause that seemed increasingly hopeless. Alara appeared beside her, still pale but steady on her feet. What are you thinking? That I've made a terrible mistake. Nyra's voice was quiet, meant only for her sister. I thought I could change things. Thought surviving made me strong enough to challenge an entire kingdom, but all I've done is get good people killed for my pride. That's not true, isn't it? Nyra gestured to the arguing alphas. Look at them. They're terrified, and they're right to be. We can't win a straight fight against 3 armies. We can't run forever. And I don't have a plan that doesn't end with most of us dead. Alara grabbed her hand, squeezing hard. Then find one. Because you're right, you can't win a straight fight. So stop trying to fight the way he expects you to. Nyra looked at her sister, seeing determination in eyes that had been broken and terrified just days ago. What are you saying? I'm saying you've survived this long by being unpredictable, by doing things no one expected, by turning his strengths into weaknesses. Alara's grip tightened. So do it again. Find the thing he's not expecting and hit him there. The argument behind them was getting louder, more heated. In another minute, they'd start fracturing, losing the unity that made them dangerous. But Alara's words had sparked something in Nyra's mind. A memory of sitting in the palace library, bored during her Luna training, reading old histories to pass the time. Stories of battles and sieges and wars that had shaped the kingdom. And one story in particular about a rebellion that had failed not because they lost on the battlefield, but because they lost something else entirely. The council, Nyra said suddenly. What? Darien's bringing 3 armies, but he's leaving the capital vulnerable. The council, the real power behind the throne, they'll still be there, making decisions, controlling the kingdom. Nyra's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. He thinks we'll focus on surviving his attack. He's not expecting us to ignore his armies and go straight for the head. Alara's eyes widened. You want to attack the capital? While he's here crushing the Northern Territories? Not attack, expose. Nyra turned back to the arguing alphas, raising her voice. Enough! The room fell silent. You're all arguing about how to survive, Nyra said, walking to the center of the group. But survival isn't enough anymore.
We need to win, and we can't do that by fighting Darian's armies on ground he chose. Then what do you suggest? Torin asked.
We split our forces. Most of you stay here, make it look like we're preparing for a siege. Draw Darian's attention north, keep him focused on crushing the rebellion. Nira looked around the circle. While I take a small team south to the capital. That's suicide, Mussum, Marcus said flatly. Even if you make it through his armies, even if you somehow get into the capital again, what are you going to do? The council has been running this kingdom for decades. They're not going to just surrender because you show up. I'm not going there to fight them. Nira's voice was steady, certain. I'm going to show the kingdom who they really are, what they've done, why they ordered Darian to reject me in the first place. She pulled out the journal she'd found in the mountains, the one that had explained her warden heritage. She'd been carrying it ever since, studying it, learning from it. The council knew about the wardens, knew what my bloodline could do, and they've spent centuries making sure no warden ever took power, because we threaten everything they've built, the hierarchy, the control, the system that keeps them on top. Nira set the journal on the table. This is proof. Proof that they've been manipulating bloodlines, arranging marriages, even ordering executions to keep wardens from rising. So you show people a dusty old journal, Lyssa said skeptically. You think that'll be enough to turn the kingdom against the council? Not just the journal. I'll make them admit it. Publicly. In front of witnesses who matter. The other alphas, the nobles. Anyone with power and influence. Nira's jaw set. And I'll do it during the bonding ceremony. Silence fell across the room. The ceremony with Lady Seraphina, Marcus said slowly. 3 days from now, if they're keeping to the schedule. Every alpha in the kingdom will be there. Every noble house. Everyone who matters. Gathered in one place to witness Darian take a new Luna. Nira smiled grimly. Perfect audience for the truth. This is insane, Elena said, but there was admiration in her voice. Completely insane. It's also the only plan we have that doesn't end with us all dead in the mountains. Nira looked at each alpha in turn. I need volunteers. Small team, people who can move fast and fight hard. We go to the capital, we crash the ceremony, we expose the council's corruption in front of the entire kingdom. And then, Torin asked, then we see if the kingdom is ready for change, if they choose to keep supporting a system built on lies and manipulation, or if they're willing to fight for something better. Cade stepped forward immediately. I'm in. Me too, Lyssa said. If we're doing something this stupid, I want a front row seat. One by one, others volunteered. Not the whole force. Most would stay to defend the northern territories, to keep Darian's armies occupied, but enough for a strike team, enough to make this work. Alara grabbed Nira's arm. I'm coming too. No, you're staying here where it's safe. There is no safe anymore. You made sure of that when you started this war. Alara's voice was firm. And you need me. I lived in that palace for years. I know the layout, the schedules, the ways in and out that guards don't watch. You want to crash a royal ceremony? You need someone who knows how these things work. Nira wanted to argue, wanted to protect her sister from the danger ahead. But Alara was right. Her knowledge could make the difference between success and failure. Fine, Nira said, but you stay close to me, always. Wouldn't dream of being anywhere else. They left that night, 20 wolves moving south through terrain Darian's armies had already passed. It was dangerous, insane, exactly the kind of plan that fell apart the moment reality interfered. But it was also the kind of plan nobody would expect, which gave them their only real advantage. The journey south took 2 days of hard travel, avoiding patrols, moving through forests, and over mountains that tested even Nira's enhanced endurance. They lost one wolf to a scout patrol that got too close, had to fight their way out of an ambush that cost them precious time. But they made it to the capital the morning of the bonding ceremony. The city was decorated for celebration, banners everywhere, streets cleaned, vendors selling flowers and sweets. The whole kingdom pretending everything was fine, that this was a joyous occasion instead of a desperate attempt to shore up a failing regime. Nira watched from a rooftop as nobles arrived in carriages, as alphas from across the kingdom gathered at the palace gates. All the power and influence in the kingdom assembled in one place. Perfect. How do we get in? Cade asked beside her. The palace was locked down tight, guards everywhere, security checking everyone who entered. Alara pulled out a bundle of clothes she'd somehow acquired. We go in as servants, kitchen staff. They'll need extra hands for a feast this size, and security never looks too closely at the people serving food. That's your plan? Lissa looked skeptical. Walk in the front door? The best hiding place is usually in plain sight. Alara started changing into the servant's uniform. Trust me, I've been invisible in that palace my whole life. I know how it works. It shouldn't have worked, but it did. They walked through the servants' entrance, carrying trays and baskets like they belonged there, and nobody gave them a second glance. The palace was chaos, hundreds of servants rushing around, preparing the feast, decorating the great hall, making sure everything was perfect for the ceremony. Nira kept her head down and followed Alara through corridors she remembered, past rooms she'd once walked through as the Almost Luna. Everything looked the same, but felt different now that she was an intruder instead of a resident. The ceremony starts in an hour, Alara whispered. They'll gather in the throne room first for the official binding, then move to the Great Hall for the feast. We need to strike during the ceremony itself, when everyone's attention is focused forward. Where will the council be? Behind the throne. They always stand there during official ceremonies, like they're puppet masters pulling strings. Alara's voice was bitter. Which I guess they are. Nira and her team hid in a storage room near the throne room, listening to the palace come alive around them. Voices, footsteps, music starting to play. The sounds of celebration for a bond that meant nothing except political survival. 5 minutes, Cade said, checking the hallway. The ceremony's about to start. Nira took a deep breath, feeling her power humming under her skin. This was it. The moment everything either changed or fell apart completely. Remember the plan. We wait until Darian and Seraphina are at the altar. When Corwin asks if anyone objects, that's our cue. She looked at each member of her team. No matter what happens, we make sure the truth gets heard. That's all that matters. They moved into position, slipping into the throne room through a side entrance servants used. The room was packed. Hundreds of nobles and alphas, all dressed in their finest, all watching as Darian and a young woman in white walked toward the altar. Lady Seraphina was beautiful in the way expensive things were beautiful. Perfect, polished, and utterly without personality. She looked terrified, holding Darian's arm like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Nira felt a flash of sympathy. This girl was as much a pawn as Nira had been. Maybe more, since at least Nira had been cast aside instead of chained. Elder Corwin stood at the altar, his ancient face solemn. Behind him, the 7 council members watched with expressions of satisfaction. This was their victory. Another generation secured, another potential threat neutralized, their power preserved. We gather here, Corwin began, his voice carrying across the silent room, to witness the binding of Alpha King Darian Thorn and Lady Seraphina Blackwood. This bond represents the future of our kingdom, the promise of stability and strength. The same words he'd spoken at Nira's ceremony, the same ritual, the same promises, except this time it was alive from start to finish. Corwin went through the traditional questions, and Darian answered them all perfectly. His voice was steady, but Nira could see the tension in his shoulders. He knew this was wrong. He just didn't know how to stop it. If any among you have objection to this bond, Corwin said, reaching the critical moment, speak now or I object. Nira stepped out from the crowd, her voice cutting across the room like a blade. The throne room erupted into chaos. Gasps, shouts, people standing and pointing, guards reaching for weapons. But before anyone could move, Nira's pack emerged from their hiding places, surrounding the altar, creating a barrier between her and everyone else. Darian stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. Again. Nira, he breathed, how did you get past 3 armies? Sneak into the capital? Walk right into your throne room? She smiled coldly. I'm full of surprises, Darian. You should know that by now. One of the council members, Elder Marcus, the political mind behind half the council's schemes, stepped forward. Guards, seize her. She's an enemy of the crown, a traitor. I'm the rightful Luna, Nira interrupted, her voice loud enough to carry to every corner of the room. Rejected illegally on the council's orders because they were afraid of what I might become. Murmurs ran through the crowd, confusion, doubt, interest. That's absurd, Marcus said. The Alpha King rejected you because you were unstable, unfit. I was a warden. Nira pulled out the journal, holding it up so everyone could see. My bloodline carries a power the council has spent centuries trying to erase. The power to command the wild, to heal, to challenge the very hierarchy this kingdom is built on. And they knew it. They've always known it. She threw the journal toward the nearest Alpha, Lord Brennan from the Eastern Territories. Read it. See for yourself. Generations of manipulation, arranged marriages designed to dilute Warden blood, executions disguised as accidents, all to make sure no one like me ever threatened their control. Brennan picked up the journal, his eyes scanning the pages. His expression darkened with every line he read. If this is real, he looked up at the council. Is this true? Of course not, Marcus said quickly. It's obviously a forgery, designed to... It's not a forgery. Elder Corwin's voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a knife. It's real. Every word. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus turned to stare at Corwin. What are you doing? I'm tired, Corwin said simply. Tired of the lies. Tired of watching this kingdom tear itself apart to preserve our power. Tired of being part of a system that destroys anyone who threatens it. He looked at Naira, and there was something like respect in his milky eyes. She deserved better than what we did to her. The kingdom deserves better than what we've made it. You senile old fool, Marcus started, but Corwin raised his hand. I was there when the council made the decision to eliminate the Warden bloodlines. When we decided that control mattered more than justice, that stability justified any cruelty. His voice strengthened. We told Darian that Naira was dangerous, that bonding with her would destroy the kingdom, that rejecting her was his duty as king. Every eye in the room turned to Darian. His face had gone pale. You told me she was unstable, that the healers said her wolf was fractured, that she couldn't survive as Luna. We lied, Corwin said. About all of it. She was never weak. She was never unstable. She was just powerful in ways we couldn't control. And that made her too dangerous to allow near the throne. Darian looked like he'd been struck. His eyes found Naira's across the room, and in them she saw horror, realization, regret. Naira, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't know. I swear I didn't. Does it matter? Naira's voice was cold, controlled, though inside she was shaking. You trusted them instead of me. You chose to believe their lies instead of fighting for the bond we shared. Whether you knew the full truth or not, you still threw me away. She turned to address the room, every alpha and noble watching with rapt attention. This is what the council does. They manipulate. They control. They destroy anyone who threatens the system that keeps them in power. And they'll keep doing it, generation after generation, unless we stop them. And you think you can do better? One of the alphas called out. You're asking us to tear down everything for your revenge. Not for revenge, for change. Nira's voice rang out clear and strong. I'm asking you to build something better. A kingdom where power comes from merit instead of bloodline. Where alphas represent their territories instead of serving the council. Where someone like me can't be thrown away just because old men are afraid of what she might become. She looked at Darian again. You wanted to fix this. Here's your chance. Stand with me. Dismantle the council's power. Build the kingdom we both know this could be. For a long moment, Darian just stared at her. The entire room held its breath. Then he turned to the council. Is it true? All of it? Marcus opened his mouth, probably to lie again, but Corwin spoke first. Yes, every word she said is true. Darian's jaw clenched, his hands became fists, and when he spoke, his voice was the coldest thing Naira had ever heard. Then you're all stripped of your positions, effective immediately. Guards, escort them out. You can't, Marcus started. I'm the Alpha King. I can do whatever I want. Isn't that what you've been telling me my whole life? Darian's eyes blazed. Get them out of my sight, now. The guards moved, though they looked confused, uncertain. But when Corwin went peacefully, when the ancient elder who'd served for 60 years submitted without fight, the others had no choice but to follow. As the council was escorted out, Darian turned back to Naira. The room was still silent, everyone watching, waiting. I can't undo what I did to you, he said quietly. Can't give you back the year you lost, the pain you suffered. But I can try to make it right, try to build the kingdom you're describing. With her as your Luna? Someone called out. After everything that's happened? Darian looked at Seraphina, still standing at the altar in her white dress. The girl looked relieved, honestly, like she'd been given a reprieve from execution. Lady Seraphina, Darian said gently, I'm sorry you were used this way. You deserve better than being a political pawn. You're free to return to your father with my apologies and a promise that the Western territories will be treated fairly under any new arrangement.
Serafina practically ran from the altar, and Nira couldn't blame her. Then Darian turned back to Naira, and the question in his eyes was clear. Could they fix this? Could the bond that had been severed be rebuilt? Could they rule together the way they were supposed to have from the beginning? Naira looked at him, really looked at him, saw the regret, the pain, the genuine desire to make amends. A year ago, she would have said yes without hesitation, would have been grateful just to be accepted again. But that girl was dead, and the woman standing here now wanted something more than just acceptance. No, she said quietly. Confusion flickered across Darian's face. No? I don't want to be your Luna. Not anymore. Nira's voice was steady, certain, because being Luna means serving the throne, supporting the king, being one step behind and one voice quieter. And I'm done being quiet. She looked around the room at all the alphas and nobles watching. I want to rule, actually rule, not as someone's mate or support, but as an equal. Joint sovereignty, 2 thrones, 2 voices. Real shared power. She turned back to Darian. The council feared what I could become. Let's show them they were right to be afraid. The murmurs that ran through the crowd were shocked, scandalized. Joint sovereignty was ancient, hadn't been practiced in centuries. The idea of a Luna with equal power to the king went against everything the modern kingdom was built on, which was exactly why Naira wanted it. The alphas would never accept, Marcus started, then stopped, remembering he no longer had authority to speak. But Lord Brennan stepped forward, the journal still in his hands. I would. The Eastern Territories have suffered under council manipulation for decades. If this is what it takes to break that cycle, then I'll support it. The Southern Territories as well, another alpha said. Anything's better than watching the kingdom tear itself apart. One by one, alphas pledged their support. Not all of them. Some walked out in protest, refusing to accept such a radical change. But enough. More than enough. Darian looked overwhelmed, like the ground had shifted under his feet. This would change everything, the entire power structure, the traditions. Yes, Nira said. That's the point. The old ways are dying, Darian. We can either cling to them until everything collapses, or we can build something new, something better. She stepped closer, close enough that only he could hear her next words. I don't love you anymore. Maybe I never really did. Maybe that was just the bond, or the idea of what we were supposed to be. But I respect what you're trying to do now, and I think we could build something powerful together if we're both willing to let go of what we thought this was supposed to be. Darian was quiet for a long time. Then he smiled, sad but genuine. Joint sovereignty, he said, equal power, equal voice. Equal responsibility for fixing this mess, Nira added. That too. He held out his hand. Deal? Nira looked at his hand, at the gesture that was so different from the bond they'd once shared. Not romance or fate or destiny. Just 2 people choosing to work together towards something bigger than either of them alone. She took his hand. Deal. The throne room erupted into noise, some cheering, some protesting, everyone having opinions they needed to share immediately. But Naira barely heard it, because she'd done it. Not the way she'd planned, not the neat, satisfying revenge she'd sometimes fantasized about, but she'd won, not by destroying Darian or burning the kingdom down, but by forcing it to change, to evolve, to become something better than what it had been. It wasn't perfect. The joint sovereignty would be complicated, messy, full of conflicts and compromises. Some territories would resist. The deposed council members would plot from the shadows. There would be fights and setbacks and moments when everything seemed ready to collapse. But it was a start. And starts were what mattered when you were trying to change the world. Later that night, after hours of negotiations and arguments and arrangements, Nira found herself on one of the palace balconies, looking out over the city that had once cast her out. Alara joined her, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders. You did it, her sister said softly. Everything you said you would. Not quite everything. I wanted to watch Darian grovel. Nira smiled slightly. But I guess shared power is better than revenge. Is it strange? Being back here? Terrifying, actually. Naira's hands gripped the balcony railing. A year ago, I left here broken. Now I'm supposed to help rule the entire kingdom. What if I'm not ready? What if I make terrible decisions and everything falls apart? Then you'll fix it, like you fixed everything else. Alara leaned her head on Nira's shoulder. You're not the same girl who left here. You're stronger now. Harder. But also kinder, I think.
Because you understand what it's like to be thrown away. Nira thought about that, about the villages she'd visited, the wolves she'd gathered, the people who'd followed her not because she was powerful, but because she'd survived what should have killed her. The system that rejected me is still there, she said, built into every tradition, every hierarchy, every rule that says some people matter more than others. Changing my title doesn't change that. No, Alara agreed, but it's a crack in the foundation, and cracks are where light gets in. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the city lights, listening to distant sounds of celebration or protest. Hard to tell which. What are you going to do first? Alara asked. As queen? Nira smiled. I'm going to find every wolf who's been cast out, rejected, or told they don't matter. And I'm going to show them they were lied to. That strength comes in forms the old powers don't recognize. That survival is its own kind of victory. That's a lot of wolves. I know, but I've got time now, and power, and a kingdom to remake. Nira looked at her sister. What about you? What do you want? Alara was quiet for a moment. I want to go back to the Northern Territories, help rebuild what the war damaged, make sure the wolves who fought for you aren't forgotten once the excitement dies down. You could stay here, have a position at court, influence, safety. I've had safety. It's boring. Alara grinned. Besides, someone needs to make sure Torin and the others don't start another rebellion the moment they disagree with your first policy decision. Nira laughed, the sound surprising her. When was the last time she'd laughed like that? Really laughed, not the cold, sharp sounds she'd made while building her ghost reputation? Thank you, she said seriously, for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Always, Alara said. That's what sisters do. The next morning, Nira stood in the throne room again, but this time it was different. A second throne had been brought in overnight, placed beside Darian's. Equal height, equal position, equal power. The symbolism was impossible to miss. Darian was already there, looking exhausted. He probably hadn't slept any more than Nira had. Ready? He asked. No, Nira admitted, but I don't think that matters anymore. They sat together as the Alphas filed in, as the first official session of the new government began. There were 1,000 details to work out, 100 conflicts to resolve, endless arguments about how joint sovereignty would actually function. It was messy and complicated and nothing like the fairy tale ending people probably expected. But it was real. And real was better than perfect. Nira looked around the room, at alphas who'd supported her and ones who still looked skeptical, at nobles adapting to a new power structure, at guards who weren't sure whose orders to follow when the two thrones disagreed. She thought about the girl who'd knelt in the dirt outside these gates a year ago, broken and alone, and convinced she was exactly as worthless as they'd said. That girl was gone. In her place was someone who'd learned that rejection didn't define her, that being thrown away didn't mean being destroyed, that sometimes the best revenge wasn't revenge at all. It was survival, transformation, becoming something so undeniable that the people who tried to erase you had no choice but to acknowledge you existed. The meeting droned on, debates about territory rights and tax reforms and judicial systems. Boring, necessary work of actually governing instead of just fighting. But Nira found she didn't mind, because this was what winning actually looked like. Not a dramatic final battle or a satisfying moment of vindication, just the hard daily work of building something better from the ruins of what came before. And if that work sometimes felt impossible, if there were days when she wanted to walk away from the politics and the compromise and the endless responsibility, well, she'd survived worse. She'd survived being broken. Surviving being powerful would be easier. The war was over. The revolution had succeeded. Now came the harder part, making it mean something. But Nira Voss, once rejected, once erased, now queen, had never backed down from a challenge. She wasn't about to start now. Outside the palace windows, spring was beginning to show itself. New growth pushing through winter's damage, the world renewing itself the way it always did, given time and the right conditions. Change was possible. She was living proof. And that, Nira thought, as she settled into her throne and prepared for another long day of remaking a kingdom, was enough.